Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a candlelit Victorian bedroom where a woman sits before her vanity mirror, hairbrush in hand, beginning the nightly ritual that consumed an hour of her life every single evening. You can hear the rhythmic whisper of boar bristles against cascading hair, 1 stroke, 2 strokes, continuing all the way to 100 precise, deliberate movements. The oil lamp flickers, her arm grows tired. But she doesn't stop. She can't stop. Because in Victorian England, those 100 strokes weren't just about beauty, they were about survival, social standing, and a bizarre intersection of medical science and folk magic that governed women's lives in ways you've probably never imagined. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your grandmother insisted on brushing your hair a certain way, or where those strange beauty rituals your mother practiced actually originated. Tonight, we're unravelling a peculiar thread of history that connected hairbrushes to hysteria, social class to scalp oil, and marriage prospects to the sheen of your locks. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video. Or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. Or perhaps share your own hair care memories from childhood. Did your grandmother have brushing rules? I'd love to know. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're settling into your evening routine in 1875 London. The gas lamps have been extinguished throughout the house, leaving only your bedroom candle to guide you. Your corset has been unlaced finally, and you've slipped into your white cotton nightgown with its high collar and long sleeves. Your feet rest on the cold wooden floor, barely warmed by the small rug beneath your vanity. Now comes the part of your evening you've been taught since childhood, the 100 strokes. You lift your tortoiseshell-handled hairbrush, admiring its craftsmanship for just a moment. The bristles are genuine boar hair, expensive and prized. Your mother gave you this brush on your 16th birthday with explicit instructions, 100 strokes every night without fail. Not 99, not 101, exactly 100. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. And the tradition stretches back through generations of women in your family like an unbroken chain of feminine duty. The first stroke glides through your hair from scalp to tip. You begin counting silently 1. The ritual has begun. But why 100? Why not 50 or 200? The answer lies in a fascinating collision between emerging Victorian medicine, ancient folk beliefs, and the era's obsession with quantifying everything from morality to menstruation. During the 1830s and 1840s, as the Victorian era began, doctors and scientists developed an intense fascination with measurement and numbers. They counted pulse rates, tabulated disease symptoms, and created elaborate charts for everything from proper calorie intake to ideal hours of sleep. This numerical obsession seeped into every aspect of daily life, including beauty routines. Medical texts from the 1850s onward began promoting the 100-stroke method with pseudo-scientific authority. Dr. William Acton, whose writings on health and hygiene influenced millions of Victorian women, suggested that rhythmic brushing stimulated blood flow to the scalp, strengthened hair follicles, and distributed natural oils that bathing done infrequently removed too aggressively. The number 100 appeared repeatedly in these texts, though historians still argue whether it held any medical significance or simply sounded authoritative enough to be memorable. You're on stroke 23 now. Your shoulder begins its familiar slight ache. You've trained yourself to switch hands at 50, giving each arm equal work. Outside your window, you hear the clip-clop of a late carriage passing through the cobblestone street. The sound fades. You continue brushing, The Victorian fascination with hair went far beyond simple vanity. In an era before sophisticated blood tests or internal imaging, doctors believed that hair served as a visible indicator of internal health. Glossy, thick hair meant robust constitution and good breeding. Dull, thinning hair suggested moral weakness, poor diet, or hereditary degeneracy, a word Victorians threw around with alarming frequency. Your hair wasn't just growing from your head, it was broadcasting your worth to society. Beauty manuals proliferated during the mid-Victorian period, each offering slightly different advice, but nearly all agreeing on the sacred 100-stroke ritual. The Lady's Book of Useful Information, published in 1867, devoted an entire chapter to hair care, warning readers that neglecting the nightly brushing routine would result in lustreless locks, premature greying, and the distinct possibility of nervous complaints. The book sold over 50,000 copies, stroke 47. You pause briefly to remove a few loose hairs from the brush bristles, winding them around your finger and dropping them into a small porcelain dish on your vanity. Victorians saved these loose hairs, we'll discover why later, but for now, you simply continue your counting. 48, 49, 50. You switch hands, feeling the relief in your right shoulder as your left takes over. The motion continues, hypnotic and meditative. Some women found this evening ritual relaxing. Others resented it deeply but performed it anyway, terrified of social consequences. Because here's what made the 100-stroke ritual particularly powerful. Everyone could see whether you'd done it. Your hair's condition served as public testimony to your private discipline. Arriving at a social gathering with lackluster hair was akin to announcing you were lazy, undisciplined, or worst of all indifferent to your marriage prospects. In an era when women's economic survival often depended entirely on securing a good husband, your hair became a matter of financial life and death. The ritual also connected Victorian women across social classes in unexpected ways. Aristocratic ladies brushed their hair 100 times. Middle-class shopkeepers' daughters brushed their hair 100 times. Even working-class women, exhausted from factory labour, attempted the 100 strokes when they could afford a decent brush. The practice became a great equaliser. At least in theory, though, the reality of who could actually maintain the ritual tells a different story. Stroke 72. Your arm trembles slightly. You're thinking about tomorrow's social call, wondering if anyone will notice the new ribbons you've trimmed for your day dress. Your mind wanders, but your hand continues its practiced motion automatically. This muscle memory was precisely what Victorian mothers wanted to instill in their daughters' discipline, so ingrained it required no conscious thought. Interestingly, some fringe Victorian health reformers questioned the 100-stroke doctrine. A few progressive doctors suggested that excessive brushing might damage hair rather than strengthen it, pulling out healthy strands and irritating the scalp. These voices remained marginalised, however, drowned out by the overwhelming chorus of beauty manuals, advertisements, and social pressure insisting that more brushing meant better results. You reach stroke 95, 5 more to go. Your hair gleams in the candlelight, and you can see the transformation even in this dim illumination. The brushing has indeed distributed oils from your scalp down through the length of your hair, creating a subtle sheen. The Victorians weren't entirely wrong about the technique's immediate cosmetic effects, even if their medical reasoning was questionable. 99, 100. You set down your brush with a small sigh of relief and satisfaction. Another night's duty completed. Tomorrow evening you'll do it all again, and the evening after that. And the one after that, until you're too old to lift the brush yourself, at which point, if you're wealthy enough, a lady's maid will perform the ritual for you. Tonight, you've participated in one of history's most widespread and enduring beauty rituals, a practice that connected millions of women across decades through shared experience, shared exhaustion, and shared hope that all those strokes might secure them a better future. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a candlelit Victorian bedroom where a woman sits before her vanity mirror, hairbrush in hand, beginning the nightly ritual that consumed an hour of her life every single evening. You can hear the rhythmic whisper of boar bristles against cascading hair, 1 stroke, 2 strokes, continuing all the way to 100 precise, deliberate movements. The oil lamp flickers. Her arm grows tired, but she doesn't stop. She can't stop, because in Victorian England, those 100 strokes weren't just about beauty, they were about survival, social standing, and a bizarre intersection of medical science and folk magic that governed women's lives in ways you've probably never imagined. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your grandmother insisted on brushing your hair a certain way, or where those strange beauty rituals your mother practiced actually originated. Tonight, we're unravelling a peculiar thread of history that connected hairbrushes to hysteria, social class to scalp oil, and marriage prospects to the sheen of your locks. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, or perhaps share your own hair care memories from childhood. Did your grandmother have brushing rules? I'd love to know. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're settling into your evening routine in 1875 London. The gas lamps have been extinguished throughout the house, leaving only your bedroom candle to guide you. Your corset has been unlaced finally, and you've slipped into your white cotton nightgown with its high collar and long sleeves. Your feet rest on the cold wooden floor, barely warmed by the small rug beneath your vanity. Now comes the part of your evening you've been taught since childhood, the 100 strokes. You lift your tortoiseshell-handled hairbrush, admiring its craftsmanship for just a moment. The bristles are genuine boar hair, expensive and prized. Your mother gave you this brush on your 16th birthday with explicit instructions, 100 strokes every night without fail. Not 99, not 101. Exactly 100. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers, and the tradition stretches back through generations of women in your family like an unbroken chain of feminine duty. The first stroke glides through your hair from scalp to tip. You begin counting silently 1. The ritual has begun. But why 100? Why not 50 or 200? The answer lies in a fascinating collision between emerging Victorian medicine, ancient folk beliefs, and the era's obsession with quantifying everything from morality to menstruation. During the 1830s and 1840s, as the Victorian era began, doctors and scientists developed an intense fascination with measurement and numbers. They counted pulse rates, tabulated disease symptoms, and created elaborate charts for everything from proper calorie intake to ideal hours of sleep. This numerical obsession seeped into every aspect of daily life, including beauty routines. Medical texts from the 1850s onward began promoting the 100-stroke method with pseudoscientific authority. Dr. William Acton, whose writings on health and hygiene influenced millions of Victorian women, suggested that rhythmic brushing stimulated blood flow to the scalp, strengthened hair follicles, and distributed natural oils that bathing done infrequently removed too aggressively. The number 100 appeared repeatedly in these texts, though historians still argue whether it held any medical significance or simply sounded authoritative enough to be memorable. You're on stroke 23 now. Your shoulder begins its familiar slight ache. You've trained yourself to switch hands at 50, giving each arm equal work. Outside your window, you hear the clip-clop of a late carriage passing through the cobblestone street. The sound fades. You continue brushing. The Victorian fascination with hair went far beyond simple vanity. In an era before sophisticated blood tests or internal imaging, doctors believed that hair served as a visible indicator of internal health. Glossy, thick hair meant robust constitution and good breeding. Dull, thinning hair suggested moral weakness, poor diet, or hereditary degeneracy, a word Victorians threw around with alarming frequency. Your hair wasn't just growing from your head, it was broadcasting your worth to society. Beauty manuals proliferated during the mid-Victorian period, each offering slightly different advice but nearly all agreeing on the sacred 100-stroke ritual. The Lady's Book of Useful Information, published in 1867, devoted an entire chapter to hair care, warning readers that neglecting the nightly brushing routine would result in lusterless locks, premature greying, and the distinct possibility of nervous complaints. The book sold over 50,000 copies. Stroke 47. You pause briefly to remove a few loose hairs from the brush bristles, winding them around your finger and dropping them into a small porcelain dish on your vanity. Victorians saved these loose hairs, we'll discover why later, but for now, you simply continue your counting. 48, 49, 50. You switch hands, feeling the relief in your right shoulder as your left takes over. The motion continues, hypnotic and meditative. Some women found this evening ritual relaxing. Others resented it deeply but performed it anyway, terrified of social consequences. Because here's what made the 100-stroke ritual particularly powerful: everyone could see whether you'd done it. Your hair's condition served as public testimony to your private discipline. Arriving at a social gathering with lackluster hair was akin to announcing you were lazy, undisciplined, or worst of all, indifferent to your marriage prospects. In an era when women's economic survival often depended entirely on securing a good husband, your hair became a matter of financial life and death. The ritual also connected Victorian women across social classes in unexpected ways. Aristocratic ladies brushed their hair 100 times. Middle-class shopkeepers' daughters brushed their hair 100 times. Even working-class women, exhausted from factory labour, attempted the 100 strokes when they could afford a decent brush. The practice became a great equaliser. At least in theory, though the reality of who could actually maintain the ritual tells a different story. Stroke 72. Your arm trembles slightly. You're thinking about tomorrow's social call, wondering if anyone will notice the new ribbons you've trimmed for your day dress. Your mind wanders, but your hand continues its practiced motion automatically. This muscle memory was precisely what Victorian mothers wanted to instill in their daughters' discipline, so ingrained it required no conscious thought. Interestingly, some fringe Victorian health reformers questioned the 100-stroke doctrine. A few progressive doctors suggested that excessive brushing might damage hair rather than strengthen it, pulling out healthy strands and irritating the scalp. These voices remained marginalised, however, drowned out by the overwhelming chorus of beauty manuals, advertisements, and social pressure insisting that more brushing meant better results. You reach stroke 95, 5 more to go. Your hair gleams in the candlelight, and you can see the transformation even in this dim illumination. The brushing has indeed distributed oils from your scalp down through the length of your hair, creating a subtle sheen. The Victorians weren't entirely wrong about the technique's immediate cosmetic effects, even if their medical reasoning was questionable. 99, 100. The morning after your 100 strokes, you wake to find a pamphlet has been delivered with the Morning Post. Your mother ordered it from a London publisher, and the title proclaims in bold letters Dr. Harrington's Complete Guide to Feminine Health Through Proper Hair Management. You settle into your breakfast chair, tea cooling beside you, and begin reading the most bizarre medical advice you've encountered this month, which is saying something. Considering last week's newsletter recommended arsenic wafers for a clear complexion, Dr. Harrington, whose actual medical credentials remain suspiciously vague, opens with a startling claim. The condition of a woman's hair directly corresponds to the condition of her womb, her nerves, and her moral character. You nearly spit out your tea. But you keep reading, because every woman you know owns at least one pamphlet like this, and the advice contained within shapes decisions about your body, your routine, and your understanding of your own health. The Victorian medical establishment's obsession with hair care emerged from a peculiar blend of genuine anatomical observation and complete nonsense. Doctors correctly understood that hair growth required nutrition delivered through blood vessels in the scalp. They accurately noted that severe illness often resulted in hair loss or changes in texture. But then they made wild logical leaps that would make modern dermatologists weep into their medical journals. According to texts like Harrington's Guide, brushing your hair 100 times nightly stimulated blood flow not just to your scalp but throughout your entire body. The rhythmic motion supposedly calmed nervous disorders, regulated menstrual cycles, prevented headaches, improved digestion, and most importantly prepared your body for the rigours of childbearing. The 100 strokes became a prescription, not merely a beauty tip. You flip to page 7, where an illustration shows the proper angle for brush strokes beginning at the scalp with firm pressure, then following through to the hair's end with gradually lightening touch. Dr. Harrington insists this technique draws vital humours from the body's core to the crown, where they may be properly dispersed and regulated. Humours. In 1875, the ancient Greek medical theory of bodily humours was still influencing Victorian health advice, decades after it should have been abandoned. But here's the uncomfortable truth: these medical pamphlets sold extraordinarily well precisely because Victorian women had so few other sources of health information. Doctors rarely examined female patients directly. That would be improper. Women couldn't attend medical schools in significant numbers until the late Victorian period, so health guidance came through pamphlets, ladies' magazines, and advice passed between female relatives, creating an echo chamber where pseudoscience reinforced itself across generations. The British Medical Journal, a more reputable publication, occasionally featured articles about hair health during the 1860s and 1870s. These pieces walked a fine line between genuine medical observation and Victorian social expectations. One 1868 article noted that regular brushing removes debris and promotes cleanliness, which was accurate. But the same article claimed that women who neglect this duty often suffer from melancholy, hysteria, and wandering thoughts, a spectacular leap from unwashed hair to mental illness. You set down the pamphlet and move to your mirror, examining your hair in the morning light. After last night's 100 strokes, it does look healthier than your friend Margaret's hair, which always appears slightly tangled and dull. Margaret confessed last week that she sometimes skips the full ritual when she's exhausted from caring for her invalid mother. You felt simultaneously superior and guilty superior because your discipline shows results. Guilty because judging Margaret makes you precisely the kind of woman these pamphlets want you to be. The medical justification for 100-stroke brushing appeared everywhere in Victorian print culture. Godey's Lady's Book, the most influential American women's magazine of the era with subscribers throughout Britain as well, ran monthly columns about hair care from the 1850s through the 1890s. These columns blended fashion advice with medical claims, telling readers that proper brushing prevented everything from consumption to nervous prostration. Historians still argue whether the magazine's editors genuinely believed these claims, or simply printed what sold subscriptions. The numerical specificity, exactly 100 strokes, gave the practice a scientific veneer that vague advice like brush thoroughly lacked. Victorians loved quantification. They measured, counted, and categorized everything from butterfly specimens to criminal skull shapes. Assigning a specific number to a beauty ritual made it feel like legitimate medicine rather than folk tradition. But where did the number actually originate? Medical historians have traced references to 100-stroke brushing back to French court beauty practices in the 18th century, though those earlier rituals didn't carry the same medical justifications. The practice crossed the English Channel and gained scientific credibility during the Victorian obsession with systemizing knowledge by adding medical language to an existing practice. Victorian doctors created something that felt both traditional and modern. You return to Dr. Harrington's pamphlet, reading his case studies. Miss A, age 23, suffered from nervous headaches and poor marriage prospects until adopting the 100-stroke method. Within 6 months, her headaches vanished and she secured an engagement to a respectable clerk. The pamphlet doesn't mention whether Miss A's headaches might have had other causes, or whether her engagement had anything to do with her hair. Correlation becomes causation when you're selling pamphlets for 6pence each. The medical establishment's embrace of hair care rituals served another purpose. It gave doctors a way to discuss women's bodies without directly examining them. A physician could ask about a woman's brushing habits, comment on her hair's appearance, and extrapolate conclusions about her overall health, all while maintaining proper Victorian distance. Hair became a proxy for examining the female body, a safe topic that nevertheless supposedly revealed intimate health details. Some doctors took the connection even further. An 1872 medical text suggested that women with prematurely grey hair likely suffered from uterine disturbances, and that proper brushing could delay greying by restoring harmony to the feminine system. The text sold through 5 printings, suggesting thousands of women read and presumably believed this connection between hair pigmentation and reproductive health. The beauty manual industry exploded during the mid-Victorian period, with new titles appearing monthly: The Art of Beauty by Madame Lola Montez, The Ugly Girl Papers by S.D. Powers, Beauty, Its Attainment and Preservation by an anonymous professional beauty. Each promised to reveal secrets for achieving the Victorian ideal of feminine appearance. And nearly all emphasized extensive hair brushing as fundamental to success. These manuals didn't merely suggest brushing, they created elaborate systems around it. Some recommended brushing in specific patterns: horizontal strokes for the first 25, vertical for the second 25, diagonal right for the third set, diagonal left for the fourth. Others insisted on brushing only during certain moon phases or times of day. The 100 strokes became the minimum requirement, with some manuals suggesting 200 for optimal results. You glance at the clock. You've been reading for nearly an hour, and you still have the day's tasks ahead. But the pamphlet has accomplished its purpose. You're thinking about your hair, evaluating your routine, considering whether you should purchase Dr. Harrington's recommended stimulating hair tonic to enhance the effects of your nightly brushing. The marketing works because it taps into genuine anxiety about health, appearance, and social standing. The really clever aspect of these medical beauty pamphlets was how they made hair care feel simultaneously like self-improvement and social duty. You weren't brushing for vanity, how unbecoming you were brushing for health. You were preventing nervous disorders, supporting your constitution, preparing your body for future motherhood. The 100 strokes became virtuous, medical, almost sacred. And if you failed to complete the ritual, the pamphlets made clear that you risked not just dull hair, but actual illness, social failure, and moral decline. Doctor. Harrington's guide includes a cautionary tale about a young woman who dismissed the 100-stroke method as old-fashioned nonsense, and subsequently suffered from nervous collapse, unmarriageability, and a sad decline into melancholic spinsterhood. The message, brush your hair or ruin your life. You set down your brush with a small sigh of relief and satisfaction. Another night's duty completed. Tomorrow evening, you'll do it all again, and the evening after that, and the one after that, until you're too old to lift the brush yourself, at which point, if you're wealthy enough, a lady's maid will perform the ritual for you. Tonight you've participated in one of history's most widespread and enduring beauty rituals, a practice that connected millions of women across decades through shared experience, shared exhaustion, and shared hope that all those strokes might secure them a better future. You're walking through London's bustling commercial district on a Saturday afternoon in 1878, and you notice something remarkable. Nearly every other shop window displays hairbrushes, not tucked discreetly in corners, but prominently featured as desirable consumer goods. Brushes with ivory handles, brushes with tortoiseshell backs, brushes with silver inlay, brushes promising revolutionary bristle technology. The sheer variety overwhelms you. 30 years ago, your grandmother made do with a single wooden brush that lasted her entire adult life. Now, advertisements suggest you need separate brushes for morning styling, evening maintenance, and specialized treatments. How did hairbrushes transform from simple tools into must-have products that factories churned out by the thousands? The Industrial Revolution changed everything about how Victorian women approached their 100-stroke ritual. Before the 1840s, quality hairbrushes were expensive, often handmade items that only wealthy families could afford. A craftsman would individually set each bristle into a wooden or bone base, a painstaking process that made brushes precious heirlooms passed from mother to daughter. Your great-grandmother's brush, still kept in your family's attic, represents hundreds of hours of skilled labour. Then came mechanisation. By the 1850s, factories in Birmingham and Sheffield developed machines that could set bristles into brushbacks rapidly and consistently. What once took a craftsman hours now took machines minutes. Production costs plummeted. Suddenly, the middle-class shopkeeper's wife could afford a decent boar bristle brush. The working-class factory girl might save up for a simpler version. The 100-stroke ritual, previously an aristocratic practice, became democratized through industrial capitalism. You pause before a shop window displaying the latest offerings from Kent Brushes, established in 1777 but now riding the Victorian manufacturing boom. Their advertisement promises scientifically designed bristle patterns for optimal hair health. The brush costs 3 shillings, nearly a day's wages for a housemaid, but manageable for someone of your middle-class station. You notice the company has cleverly created different product lines, premium brushes for wealthy customers, moderate options for the middle class, and basic models for working women. Everyone can participate in the 100-stroke ritual, just at different price points. The marketing surrounding these brushes grew increasingly sophisticated as competition intensified. Manufacturers didn't just sell brushes, they sold the promise of transformation. An 1875 advertisement for Mason Pearson Brushes, a company that still exists today, featured testimonials from satisfied ladies who claimed their hair improved dramatically after switching brands. "My hair was dull and lifeless until I discovered the revolutionary rubber-cushioned brush," wrote one anonymous woman. "Now, after my nightly 100 strokes with this superior instrument, Gentlemen regularly compliment my lustrous locks. Whether that testimonial was genuine or invented by a clever copywriter remains unknown, but it worked. Mason-Pearson brushes became status symbols, recognizable by their distinctive rubber cushion backing that supposedly provided better scalp stimulation. Owning the right brand of brush signalled not just wealth, but awareness of modern innovations and commitment to proper feminine maintenance. Bristle quality became an obsession. The finest brushes used boar bristles, praised for being firm yet gentle, excellent at distributing natural oils from scalp to hair tips. But genuine boar bristles were expensive, so manufacturers developed alternatives. Some used horsehair, which was cheaper but less effective. Others experimented with plant fibres or early synthetic materials. The cheapest brushes used simple wooden pegs, barely better than running your fingers through your hair. You enter the shop, and a clerk immediately approaches, eager to demonstrate the latest models. He shows you a brush with mixed bristles, boar hair, combined with stiffer plant fibres supposedly designed to penetrate deeply for maximum stimulation while smoothing the hair's surface. You're sceptical but intrigued. The clerk explains that the brush's wooden back comes from beechwood, carefully shaped and polished to prevent snagging. The bristles are arranged in a specific pattern that promotes even oil distribution during the recommended 100 strokes. Notice how the clerk casually mentions the 100-stroke method as if it's established scientific fact that's not accidental. Brush manufacturers actively promoted the ritual because it increased brush sales. If women believed they needed to brush extensively every night, they'd wear out brushes faster and need replacements more frequently. The 100-stroke method created perfect recurring demand for what might otherwise be a once-in-a-decade purchase. The truly clever manufacturers went further, suggesting that different hair types required different brushes. Fine hair supposedly needed softer bristles, thick hair demanded firmer ones. Curly hair required specially spaced bristle patterns. Straight hair benefited from dense packing. Women who accepted this advice, and many did, ended up owning multiple brushes for different purposes, multiplying manufacturers' profits. Factory production also enabled decorative elaboration. Brushbacks became canvases for Victorian aesthetic sensibilities. Manufacturers inlaid mother of pearl, carved intricate patterns, painted delicate flowers, and added monograms. A woman's hairbrush became a personal accessory that expressed her taste and status. Some wealthy Victorians commissioned custom brushes from luxury goods makers, treating them like jewellery. The hairbrush industry's growth was remarkable. In 1840, Britain had perhaps a dozen significant brush manufacturers. By 1880, that number had exploded to hundreds, employing thousands of workers in factories across industrial cities. The industry developed specialized workers' bristle sorters who graded materials by quality, brush makers who assembled components, finishers who polished and decorated completed products. An entire economic ecosystem emerged around getting women to brush their hair 100 times nightly. Catalogues from the period reveal astonishing variety. The 1883 Army and Navy Stores catalogue a thick volume listing thousands of products available to middle-class consumers, devoted 4 full pages to hairbrushes. Prices range from sixpence for a basic wooden model to several guineas for elaborate silver-backed sets. The catalogue's descriptions deployed pseudo-scientific language shamelessly, pneumatic bristle mounting for enhanced scalp stimulation, ergonomically angled handles to prevent evening fatigue, patented ventilation channels for improved hair health. International trade expanded the market further. British manufacturers exported brushes to colonies across the empire, bringing the 100-stroke ritual to India, Australia, and Africa. American companies like the Florence Manufacturing Company in Massachusetts competed aggressively, developing their own innovations and marketing strategies. Historians still argue whether the global spread of Victorian hair care practices represented cultural exchange or imperial imposition. The comb industry piggybacked on brush success, suggesting women needed both tools for optimal results. Advertisements recommended combing before brushing to remove tangles, then brushing for the full 100 strokes, then combing again to ensure even distribution of oils. This multi-step process required purchasing multiple products, further enriching manufacturers while adding time to women's evening routines. Some companies created combination tools, brushes with retractable combs, or double-sided designs with different bristle types on each face. These innovations solved problems women didn't know they had. A classic manufacturing strategy. Your grandmother managed fine with a single simple brush. But Victorian marketing convinced you that proper hair care required an array of specialised tools, each designed for specific purposes. The industrial production of hairbrushes also standardised the objects in ways that reinforced the 100-stroke ritual. Manufacturers settled on common sizes and shapes that felt comfortable for extended use. Handles were curved and weighted to reduce hand fatigue during lengthy brushing sessions. The tools themselves were designed around the assumption that women would use them extensively every evening. You purchase a mid-range brush, not the cheapest, but not extravagantly expensive either. The clerk wraps it carefully in brown paper and wishes you good evening. Walking home, package under your arm, you're participating in a consumer economy that would have been unimaginable to your great-grandmother. The 100-stroke ritual has been transformed from aristocratic luxury into middle-class routine, enabled entirely by industrial capitalism's ability to mass-produce once rare goods. Tonight, you'll use your new brush for the first time, counting out your 100 strokes with bristles that came from a factory where workers you'll never meet laboured to produce the tools of your beauty ritual. The personal and the industrial have become inseparably intertwined. You're attending an afternoon tea at Mrs. Pemberton's townhouse, and you notice something fascinating. You can immediately identify each woman's social class by observing the hairbrush she pulls from her reticule when the ladies retire to freshen up before departure. Lady Catherine's brush gleams with genuine tortoiseshell and sterling silver, probably worth more than the housemaid earns in 6 months. Your own respectable middle-class brush shows honest boar bristles in a polished wood frame. But poor Miss Thompson, the vicar's daughter struggling to maintain genteel appearances on almost nothing, carries a brush with wooden pegs instead of bristles, its plain handle showing wear from years of use. Nobody mentions these differences directly that would be vulgar, but everybody notices. Your hairbrush has become a class marker as reliable as your dress fabric or accent. The Victorian obsession with social hierarchy extended into every aspect of daily life. And hairbrushes were no exception. In an era when people were desperate to signal their status and equally desperate to climb the social ladder, even the most intimate grooming tools became subject to elaborate class codes. The brush you owned, how you used it, who performed the actual brushing, all these details broadcast your position in society's rigid structure. At the apex of the brush hierarchy sat brushes made from rare and expensive materials, genuine tortoiseshell backs, harvested from hawksbill sea turtles in tropical waters, topped the list. These brushes displayed beautiful mottled patterns in amber and brown, and their rarity made them genuine luxury items. Wealthy Victorian women collected matching vanity sets, hairbrush, clothes brush, hand mirror, and comb, all with coordinated tortoiseshell or ivory backs, often housed in velvet-lined cases. Silver-backed brushes ranked similarly high, hallmarked sterling silver, sometimes engraved with family crests or elaborate monograms. These brushes served double duty as functional tools and decorative objects, when displayed on a lady's dressing table. They announce wealth to any visitor who might glimpse the bedroom. Some families commissioned brushes from prestigious silversmiths like Tiffany and Company, or Asprey, turning grooming tools into genuine works of art worth substantial sums. The bristles themselves carried class significance. The finest boar bristles, sourced from specific breeds of Chinese or Russian boars, felt softer and more flexible than common varieties. Wealthy women could feel the difference, and they assumed everyone else could too. These premium bristles were often hand-sorted, with only the finest examples making it into luxury brushes. A truly elite brush might contain bristles from a single boar, ensuring perfect consistency. You remember your mother explaining these distinctions when you came of age? She showed you her own brush, inherited from her mother, with its carefully maintained boar bristles and rosewood back. "This brush marks us as respectable," she said seriously. "Not wealthy, but respectable. Never be seen with a cheap brush in public. It suggests either poverty or poor judgment, and society forgives neither." Middle-class women like yourself navigated a tricky space. You needed brushes nice enough to signal respectability, but couldn't afford or would appear pretentious buying the truly luxurious options. Manufacturers cleverly created products for exactly this market segment, brushes with genuine boar bristles, but less expensive wooden backs. Perhaps mahogany or walnut instead of exotic imports. These brushes were honestly made and functionally excellent, but lack the showiness that might suggest you of reaching above your station. The working class faced different challenges entirely. A factory girl earning shillings per week couldn't allocate much budget to hairbrushes, yet she still felt pressure to maintain the 100-stroke ritual if she hoped to attract a respectable husband. Manufacturers responded with basic models, simple wooden brushes with wooden pegs instead of bristles, or brushes using the cheapest animal hair, horsehair, or even pig bristle of the lowest grade. These brushes was functional but offered nothing like the smooth glide of expensive models. Some working women saved for months to purchase a single decent brush, viewing it as an investment in their future. A good brush might last years if carefully maintained, making it one of the few personal luxuries a servant or shopgirl could justify. Yet using a brush above one's station carried its own risks. Employers or social betters might view it as presumptuous, as if a working girl was getting ideas above her place. The social anxiety around brush quality spawned a market for fakes and frauds. Unscrupulous manufacturers created imitation tortoiseshell from horn or early plastics, selling these knockoffs to aspirational middle-class women at prices that seemed like bargains. Some women knowingly bought fakes, hoping others wouldn't notice. Others were genuinely deceived, discovering only later that their tortoiseshell brush was actually pressed and dyed cattle horn. These deceptions carried real social danger. If someone exposed your fake tortoiseshell brush at a social gathering, the humiliation would be profound. You'd be marked as either a fraud attempting to appear wealthier than you were, or a fool who couldn't tell quality from imitation. Either label damaged your social standing, possibly irreparably. The anxiety Victorian women felt about being found out extended even to their grooming tools. Etiquette books addressed brush protocol with surprising specificity. An 1876 guide to proper behaviour instructed ladies never to display their hairbrushes openly when visiting others' homes, as this might inadvertently reveal either excessive pride in a fine brush or embarrassment about a poor one. Brushes should remain concealed in one's reticule or travelling case, emerging only in the privacy of one's assigned bedroom during overnight visits. The lady's maid, that essential figure in wealthier households, created another layer of class complexity around brushing. If you employed a lady's maid, she performed your 100 strokes for you, freeing you from the physical labour while you relaxed or read. This arrangement loudly proclaimed your wealth and status. You didn't just own an expensive brush, you paid someone else to wield it. The maid herself likely owned only a basic brush for her own hair, if she owned one at all. Historians still argue whether this arrangement actually benefited the wealthy women it served. Yes, you avoided tired arms and could multitask during the ritual, but you also lost control over the process, depending on your maid's skill and consistency. Some ladies became intensely particular about exactly how their maids should brush the angle, the pressure, the rhythm, turning the ritual into a tense performance rather than relaxing routine. Brush maintenance itself divided along class lines. Wealthy women had their ladies' maids clean brushes regularly, removing accumulated hair and oils, sometimes washing bristles in rosewater or lavender solution. Middle-class women performed this maintenance themselves, usually weekly. Working-class women cleaned their brushes when possible, but often lacked time or appropriate cleaning supplies, leading to brushes that accumulated grime and lost effectiveness. The second-hand market for brushes reveals fascinating class dynamics. Pawn shops regularly stocked used brushes, often sold by desperate families during financial crisis. A silver-backed brush could be pawned for ready cash, then potentially redeemed when circumstances improved. But pawning your hairbrush carried intense shame. It meant you'd sunk so low you were selling the basic tools of respectable feminine appearance. Some charitable organizations distributed basic hairbrushes to poor women and girls, viewing proper grooming as essential to moral improvement. The logic went that if poor women maintained their hair properly, including the aspirational 100 strokes nightly, they'd develop the discipline and self-respect needed to escape poverty. This patronizing attitude ignored the reality that exhausted working women barely had time or energy for basic hygiene, let alone lengthy beauty rituals. You glance again at the brushes scattered across Mrs. Pemberton's guest room dressing table, a silent but eloquent display of Victorian social hierarchy. Lady Catherine's brush glints with precious materials. Your own sits respectably in the middle rank. Miss Thompson's humble wooden brush seems almost apologetic in this company. Nobody will comment on these differences, but everybody has noticed, catalogued, and judged your hairbrush. Like everything else in Victorian society, announces exactly where you belong in the great chain of being and whether you're content to stay there or audaciously attempting to climb higher. You're below stairs in a grand London townhouse at 10:30 in the evening, watching as Sarah, the lady's maid, finally climbs the narrow servants' staircase to attend to her mistress's hair. Sarah has been awake since 5 o'clock this morning, 17 hours ago, managing laundry, mending torn lace, pressing tomorrow's gown, and handling a dozen other tasks. Now comes perhaps the most time-consuming duty of her day, executing the 100-stroke ritual on hair that isn't her own. Her arms ache. Her eyes burn with fatigue. But Lady Ashworth sits at her vanity expecting the full treatment. And Sarah knows that sloppy brushing tonight means potential dismissal tomorrow. The 100-stroke ritual that you perform on yourself becomes an entirely different experience when you're the one wielding the brush for someone else's benefit. Night after exhausting night. The lady's maid occupied a peculiar position in Victorian households, higher status than ordinary housemaids or kitchen staff, but still firmly a servant, existing in a strange liminal space between upstairs and downstairs worlds. Her duties centred on her mistress's body and appearance dressing, undressing, maintaining clothes, and crucially, managing hair in wealthy households. This meant performing the sacred 100 strokes every single evening, transforming what might be a meditative personal ritual into repetitive physical labour. Sarah approaches the vanity where Lady Ashworth sits reading a French novel, barely acknowledging her maid's presence. This is normal. Sarah has learned not to expect conversation or gratitude. She's essentially furniture that happens to hold a hairbrush. She begins removing the pins from her mistress's elaborate day hairstyle, a style that Sarah herself constructed this morning. Pins drop into the porcelain dish with tiny metallic clinks. Lady Ashworth's hair tumbles down thick, healthy, gleaming even in gaslight. Of course it's healthy. Sarah spends an hour daily maintaining it. The maid lifts the sterling silver hairbrush from the vanity, the one worth more than Sarah earns in 3 months, and begins the ritual. Stroke 1. She's counted to 100 so many times she could do it in her sleep. Sometimes she practically does, her exhausted brain operating on pure muscle memory, while her consciousness drifts towards her narrow bed in the attic servants' quarters. Still hours away. Victorian household management manuals spelled out the lady's maid's hair care duties with exacting detail. The Art of Beauty by Madame Lola Montez, published in 1858, devoted an entire chapter to what employers should expect from their ladies' maids. The maid should brush with steady, rhythmic strokes, neither too vigorous nor too gentle, ensuring complete coverage from scalp to hair tips. She should watch for tangles, address them gently, and never, under any circumstances, pull hard enough to cause her mistress discomfort. The 100 strokes should take approximately 15 to 20 minutes. Any faster suggested carelessness, any slower implied inefficiency. Stroke 27. Sarah's shoulder begins its familiar ache. She's right-handed, and after years of this nightly duty, her right shoulder protests more loudly than it used to. She's 23 years old, the same age as Lady Ashworth, but her body feels decades older. Repetitive motion injury wasn't a term Victorians used, but Sarah experiences it nonetheless, chronic pain from performing the same task, the same way, hundreds of times yearly. The power dynamic inherent in this arrangement was profound. Lady Ashworth could relax, read her novel, even doze off while Sarah laboured. The mistress's hair received perfect care while Sarah's own hair tucked under her cap all day, brushed hastily if at all suffered from neglect. Sarah owned a brush, a simple wooden model purchased with carefully saved wages, but she rarely had energy to use it properly on herself. Her own 100 strokes never happened. She was too busy performing someone else's. Some ladies' maids served multiple mistresses in the same household, a mother and daughters, perhaps meaning they might execute 300 or 400 stroke sessions nightly before being released to their own rest. By the time they collapsed into bed, midnight had often passed. Then came the 5 o'clock wake-up call, starting the cycle anew. The 100-stroke ritual, so valorized in beauty manuals as essential feminine self-care, became for these women a symbol of their servitude. Stroke 52. Lady Ashworth turns a page in her novel, making a small sound of amusement at something she's read. She doesn't share what entertained her. Sarah wouldn't expect her to. The class divide is too vast. They might be the same age, might both be human women with hair that requires care, but they inhabit completely different universes. One sits, one stands, one reads, one counts brush strokes, one will inherit property, one will work until her body fails. Payment for this labour was surprisingly low. Ladies' maids earned more than ordinary housemaids, perhaps £15 to £25 annually versus £10 to £15. But considering their specialised skills and the intimate nature of their work, the compensation hardly seemed adequate. They were expected to maintain perfect discretion about their mistress's body, habits, and secrets while performing physically demanding labour for hours daily. The emotional toll deserves consideration too. Sarah has spent 5 years maintaining Lady Ashworth's appearance, making her beautiful for social events, ensuring every hair sits perfectly in place. She's witnessed her mistress receive compliments on her lustrous locks, watched gentlemen admire her at balls, heard other ladies ask for her hair care secrets. Lady Ashworth sometimes smiles and mentions her religious adherence to the 100-stroke method. She never mentions Sarah. The maid's skill and labour become invisible, absorbed entirely into the mistress's personal virtue and discipline. Some ladies' maids developed deep resentment toward the 100-stroke ritual. Diaries and letters from servants occasionally survive, offering glimpses into their feelings. One maid wrote to her sister in 1873, "My arm aches perpetually from the brushing. She sits like a queen while I stand like a slave, and she believes her hair is beautiful because she is virtuous, never thinking about whose virtue it actually demonstrates, mine, for not dashing her precious brush against the wall." Other maids felt differently, taking genuine pride in their hairdressing skills. Creating beautiful hairstyles and maintaining healthy hair represented real expertise, and some ladies' maids became quite famous within aristocratic circles of their abilities. A talented lady's maid might be poached by wealthier families offering better wages. The 100-stroke ritual, in these cases, became a demonstration of professional skill rather than mere drudgery. Stroke 79. Sarah shifts her weight from one foot to the other. She's not permitted to sit while working, though her mistress sits comfortably on a cushioned stool. The inequality is so normalised that neither woman consciously registers it anymore. This is simply how the world works. Some women sit while others stand, some relax while others labour, some receive care while others provide it. The health disparities between mistresses and maids regarding hair care were stark. Ladies who received nightly 100-stroke treatments generally did have healthier hair than they would have otherwise. The oil distribution, scalp stimulation, and careful maintenance produced genuine results. Meanwhile, their maid's hair suffered from neglect, harsh soap, lack of proper nutrition, an absence of time for self-care. The class divide became literally visible in the quality of women's hair. Historians still argue whether ladies' maids ever discussed their resentments among themselves. Servant quarters provided spaces where maids from different households might meet at markets, in parks on their half-days off, in churches. Did they compare notes about whose mistress demanded the most excessive brushing routines? Did they joke about the absurdity of wealthy women who believed brushstrokes cured nervous disorders? Or did they maintain the same discretion below stairs that they practiced upstairs, internalising the ideology that kept them subordinate? Some progressive Victorian thinkers criticised the ladies' maid system as exploitative and unnecessary. Why couldn't adult women brush their own hair? What did it say about their character that they required servants to perform basic self-care? These questions occasionally appeared in reform-minded publications but never gained enough traction to change widespread practices. The wealthy liked being served, and the 100-stroke ritual provided perfect justification. It wasn't laziness. It was simply ensuring proper health maintenance by someone trained in the technique. Stroke 96. Nearly finished. Sarah's arm moves automatically now, the practiced motion requiring no conscious thought. 4 more strokes and she can finally move to the next task, probably laying out tomorrow's clothes, which will take another 20 minutes. Then she'll need to check that the fires are banked, ensure the mistress has fresh water in her bedroom, and perform half a dozen other small duties. Perhaps by midnight she'll reach her own bed. Lady Ashworth sets down her novel and examines her reflection in the mirror, admiring the glossy results of Sarah's labour. "Very good," she says absently. The only acknowledgement Sarah will receive: "No thank you." No recognition of the skill involved. Just 2 words confirming that Sarah has successfully performed the expected task. The maid sets down the brush carefully, because breaking it would mean having its cost deducted from her wages and curtsies slightly before withdrawing. 100 strokes completed. Lady Ashworth's hair care ritual is finished. Sarah's workday continues for several more hours. Tomorrow night, they'll repeat this exact scene, and the night after that, and after that, for as long as Sarah remains employed in this household. The 100-stroke method, presented in beauty manuals as empowering feminine self-care, reveals itself in the servants' quarters as just another way the privileged exploit those who serve them. You're standing before your wash basin on a chilly Wednesday evening in November, staring at the cold water and feeling a familiar dread. It's been 3 weeks since your last proper bath, not because you're lazy, but because bathing in Victorian England is an elaborate, expensive, exhausting production that most people simply can't manage frequently. The servants must haul gallons of hot water upstairs in heavy buckets. The hip bath must be positioned near the fire. Afterward, all that water must be carried back down and disposed of. For this much trouble, your mother decided the household bathes every 3 to 4 weeks, more often in summer, less in winter, yet you're expected to perform your 100 brushstrokes every single night. The math here seems problematic, doesn't it? How can you distribute clean, healthy oils through your hair when your scalp hasn't been properly washed in nearly a month? The Victorian relationship with bathing, or rather, the lack thereof, fundamentally shaped their understanding of the 100-stroke ritual. To modern sensibilities, the idea of brushing unwashed hair for weeks on end sounds unhygienic at best, revolting at worst, but Victorians operated under completely different assumptions about dirt, oil, cleanliness, and health. Their entire hair care philosophy emerged from a world where frequent bathing was impractical for most people, so they developed alternative methods for maintaining what they considered proper hygiene. Medical wisdom of the era actually discouraged frequent bathing. Doctors warned that too much water exposure weakened the constitution, opened the body to disease, and disrupted the natural balance of bodily humours, yes. They were still discussing humours in the 1870s. An 1861 medical text cautioned women against bathing more than once monthly, claiming that excessive ablutions remove protective oils that Providence has supplied for the skin's defence against atmospheric insults. Dirt, in moderation, was considered healthy. This created an interesting problem if you only bathe monthly but you're supposed to look clean and well-groomed daily. How do you manage the answer? According to Victorian beauty culture, was oil redistribution through brushing. Your scalp naturally produced sebum, though Victorians called it natural oil or hair's vital moisture, and the 100-stroke ritual was meant to spread that oil from roots to tips, essentially conditioning your hair with your own body's secretions. You dip your fingers in the wash basin and perform what Victorians called a bird bath, wiping your face, neck, and hands with cold water and a cloth. This passes for daily washing in your household. Your hair, meanwhile, has accumulated 3 weeks of oil, dust from London's coal smoke-filled air, and residue from the pomade you applied days ago to tame flyaway strands for a social call. Tonight's 100 strokes are supposed to somehow transform this accumulation into glossy, healthy-looking hair. The logic went like this. Oils near your scalp are fresh and clean, produced by healthy skin. Oils further down the hair shaft are older, possibly rancid. By brushing from roots to tips, you replace old oils with new ones, supposedly refreshing the hair without water. The 100-stroke count was meant to ensure complete distribution enough passes that every strand received fresh oil from scalp to end. Did this actually work partially? Modern dermatology confirms that sebum does provide some protective benefits to hair, preventing breakage and moisture loss. Distributing it through brushing isn't inherently harmful, but modern dermatology also confirms that accumulating weeks of unwashed sebum, environmental pollutants, and dead skin cells is absolutely not ideal for scalp health. Victorians unknowingly lived with chronic low-grade scalp conditions that regular washing would have prevented. Yet within their own context, the system made a certain practical sense. If you only bathed monthly, you needed some method for maintaining appearances between baths. The 100-stroke ritual served this function, making hair look better than it would if simply left alone. The glossy sheen that brushing created convinced Victorian women that their hair was clean and healthy, even when modern standards would judge it decidedly not clean. You lift your tortoiseshell brush and begin the nightly count. Stroke 1. The bristles glide through more slowly than they did last week, catching slightly on accumulated grease. Stroke 2. You'll need to clean the brush soon, it's collecting residue, and the bristles are losing their effectiveness. Stroke 3. You try not to think too hard about what you're actually doing, redistributing 3 weeks of unwashed scalp oil through hair that hasn't seen shampoo since early October. Victorian chemistry had not yet developed modern shampoo. When women did wash their hair during baths, they typically used harsh lye soap, the same soap used for laundry, which stripped everything from the hair and scalp, often leaving it dry and damaged. This created a vicious cycle, harsh washing damaged hair, so women avoided frequent washing. But infrequent washing led to oil build-up that made harsh soap necessary when they finally did wash. The 100-stroke ritual emerged as a compromise solution to this no-win situation. Some women tried alternative cleaning methods between baths, dry shampooing, applying powdered orris root, cornstarch, or fuller's earth to absorb oil. Then brushing it out appeared in beauty manuals as early as the 1840s. This technique actually worked reasonably well for removing excess oil without water, though it required even more vigorous brushing than the standard ritual, sometimes up to 200 strokes to fully remove the powder. Stroke 43. Your arm is tiring, but you're only approaching halfway. You notice that the brush is picking up more loose hairs than usual, not surprising, given that unwashed scalps shed more. You remove the accumulated hairs from the bristles and drop them in your porcelain hair receiver, that peculiar Victorian container designed specifically for saving shed hair. You'll discover why Victorians saved hair later, but for now, you simply continue the ritual. The class dimension of Victorian bathing practices reveals more inequality. Wealthy households with multiple servants, elaborate plumbing, and dedicated bathroom spaces could manage more frequent bathing, perhaps weekly or even twice weekly for the very rich. This meant their 100-stroke rituals distributed fresher, cleaner oils through hair that was objectively in better condition. Meanwhile, working-class women living in tenements with no private water access might bathe only a few times yearly at public bathhouses. Their 100 strokes, when they had time and energy to perform them, redistributed oils that were decidedly less fresh. Historians still argue whether Victorians actually found unwashed hair attractive, or simply convinced themselves it was attractive because they had no practical alternative. Beauty standards of the era praised lustrous and glossy hair, qualities that copious oil definitely produced. Modern eyes might see greasiness where Victorians saw healthy sheen. The aesthetic ideal adapted to match what people could actually achieve with available resources. Stroke 67. You're past halfway now. Your rhythm steady. The repetitive motion creates a slight meditative state, and you understand why some women found the ritual soothing. It provides rare, quiet time in an otherwise busy day, a moment of focus solely on yourself. Never mind that you're essentially marinating your hair in its own secretions, the ritual itself offers psychological benefits that transcend its questionable hygienic wisdom. Some progressive Victorian doctors began questioning the infrequent bathing doctrine by the 1880s. As germ theory gained acceptance, and people started understanding disease transmission more accurately, reformers argued for more frequent washing, better plumbing, and public health measures that included regular bathing. But these ideas spread slowly, and most Victorians continued traditional practices throughout the era. The 100-stroke ritual actually created its own hygiene problems. Brushes themselves accumulated oil, dead skin, loose hairs, and environmental pollutants. Victorians were supposed to clean their brushes regularly weekly, according to most manuals, but many women neglected this tedious chore. This meant they were essentially brushing today's clean oil together with last week's dirty oil from the brush bristles, somewhat defeating the purpose of oil redistribution. Proper brush cleaning required disassembling the brush if possible, washing bristles in warm soapy water, rinsing thoroughly, and allowing to dry completely before use. This took time and effort that exhausted Victorian women already performing 100 strokes nightly often couldn't muster. So brushes accumulated grime, becoming gradually less effective and potentially even damaging to hair health over time. Stroke 89. You're approaching the finish line. Your hair definitely looks shinier than when you started the brushing as distributed oil evenly, creating that prized Victorian gloss. To your eyes, trained by contemporary beauty standards, it looks healthy and well maintained. To a modern observer with 21st century hygiene expectations, it might look like you desperately need good washing. Beauty, as always, exists in the eye of the beholder and the era that shapes that eye. You complete stroke 100 and set down your brush with relief. Your hair gleams in the candlelight, looking exactly as Victorian beauty manuals promised it would. Tonight you've successfully maintained your appearance using the limited resources available to you. No running water, no modern shampoo, just a good brush and the natural oils your body provided. Within the constraints of your historical moment, you've done everything right. The fact that those constraints seem bizarre and unsanitary from a modern perspective doesn't diminish your achievement. You're working with what you have, and the 100-stroke ritual represents the best solution Victorian women could devise for managing their hair between infrequent baths in an era before modern chemistry revolutionized personal care. You're 21 years old, unmarried and acutely aware that your entire economic future depends on attracting a suitable husband within the next few years. Your father's modest income means no substantial dowry waits to sweeten your marriage prospects. Your education, while respectable, qualifies you for nothing beyond governess work if you fail to marry a fate you regard with quiet horror. So what assets do you actually possess in the Victorian marriage market? Your character? Certainly. Your accomplishments, adequate piano playing, passable watercolours, decent French, your pleasant demeanour and appropriate modesty. And, critically, your hair. That thick, glossy, carefully maintained cascade of chestnut brown that reaches past your waist represents perhaps your most valuable commodity. Every night, as you complete your 100 brush strokes, you're not just maintaining your appearance, you're literally investing in your financial future, strand by strand. The Victorian marriage market operated with brutal economic logic beneath its romantic veneer. Marriage wasn't primarily about love, though affection was considered a pleasant bonus. Marriage was an economic transaction, a social contract, a means of securing financial stability and producing legitimate heirs. Women entered this market with whatever assets they possessed: money, family connections, beauty, accomplishments, and attempted to trade those assets for the best possible husband. Hair, as one of the most visible and controllable aspects of female appearance, became a crucial negotiating chip in these high-stakes transactions. Beauty manuals made the connection explicit. An 1873 guide titled How to Be Beautiful devoted an entire chapter to hair as matrimonial currency, arguing that a woman's crowning glory may prove quite literally her crown, elevating her to positions she could never otherwise attain through the mere accident of lustrous locks and their careful cultivation. The message was clear: neglect your hair, risk spinsterhood and poverty, maintain it obsessively, potentially marry above your station. You remember your mother's lecture when you turned 16 and began seriously preparing for eventual courtship. She sat you down, hairbrush in hand, and explained the facts of Victorian life with uncomfortable directness. Your father cannot provide a substantial dowry, she said, not unkindly but firmly. Therefore, you must compensate through other means. Your face is pleasant enough, your figure adequate. But your hair, she lifted a strand, examining it in the light. Your hair is genuinely beautiful. This is your advantage. Guard it, maintain it, display it appropriately. The right man will notice. The pressure to maintain perfect hair became intense when marriage prospects appeared on the horizon. If a suitable gentleman showed interest, every aspect of your appearance required scrutiny. You increased your nightly brushstrokes to 150, just to be safe. You tried various oil treatments and herbal rinses recommended in ladies' magazines. You slept uncomfortably on your back to prevent crushing your carefully arranged nighttime braids. Your hair became a project, an obsession, a potential escape route from limited options. Victorian courtship rituals provided numerous opportunities for men to observe women's hair. At balls and social gatherings, elaborate hairstyles showcased both the hair itself and the woman's dedication to fashionable presentation. During afternoon calls, slightly less formal styles still emphasized hair quality and quantity. Even outdoor activities like croquet or archery allowed gentlemen to admire how ladies' hair caught sunlight or moved gracefully with physical activity. Some Victorian etiquette was specifically designed to create hair display opportunities. The custom of women removing their bonnets upon entering someone's home meant that visitors revealed their hair to the assembled company. This moment of unveiling, transitioning from bonneted anonymity to bare-headed visibility, functioned as a mini-performance where hair quality was immediately assessed and judged by everyone present. You attend a garden party at the Harrisons' estate, carefully timing your arrival for maximum impact. Your hair has been arranged in the latest fashion, a style that took your mother 45 minutes to achieve this morning, and you've positioned yourself near the rose garden, where dappled sunlight will show your hair to best advantage. You notice, Mr. Pettigrew, the young solicitor who recently inherited a comfortable income, glancing your direction multiple times. Is he admiring your hair? You desperately hope so. His income would provide security. His respectable profession would satisfy your parents. If your carefully maintained hair helps attract his attention, those 1,000+ hours you've spent brushing over the past 5 years will have served their purpose. The economic calculation was explicit in some contexts. Matchmaking mothers evaluated potential daughters-in-law partly on hair quality, reasoning that thick, healthy hair suggested good heredity, strong constitution, and discipline all desirable traits to introduce into the family line. Hair literally signaled genetic fitness in an era before anyone understood genetics. A woman with thin, lackluster hair faced whispered speculation about weak breeding, poor health, or inadequate feminine virtues. Some desperate women resorted to hair fraud. Hairpieces, wigs, and extensions allowed women to fake the thick, abundant hair that nature hadn't provided. These deceptions carried significant risk. If discovered, and they sometimes were, through accidents or malicious gossip, the scandal could destroy a woman's reputation entirely. She'd be marked as a fraud, untrustworthy, willing to deceive a potential husband about fundamental facts. No respectable man would marry her after such exposure. The hairpiece industry thrived on women's anxiety about their marriage prospects. Advertisements promised undetectable natural additions and transformative supplementation for thinning locks. Some manufacturers sold clip-in sections that could be hidden within natural hair. Others created entire wigs styled to match current fashions. The products ranged from expensive human hair pieces sourced from European peasant women who sold their hair for income, to cheap theatrical wigs that fooled no one up close. You've never resorted to hair pieces. Your natural hair is genuinely abundant, but you understand the temptation. Your friend Elizabeth, cursed with fine, sparse hair despite a considerable dowry, wears supplemental pieces for important social occasions. You've never mentioned noticing them, and she's never acknowledged using them, maintaining the necessary fiction that her enviable volume is entirely natural. This is how Victorian women navigated these situations through elaborate performances of not noticing, allowing each other the dignity of maintained illusions. The 100-stroke ritual itself became a signal of marriageability. Young women were expected to demonstrate the discipline, patience, and attention to self-maintenance that the nightly routine required. Mothers sometimes required daughters to brush their hair in common family spaces rather than private bedrooms, making the ritual visible to verify its completion. This public performance of private grooming demonstrated to everyone, including potential suitors who might visit, that the young woman possessed appropriate feminine virtues. Some Victorian conduct books suggested that men should inquire about women's hair care routines during courtship, treating the answer as character assessment rather than mere beauty discussion. A woman who admitted skipping her 100 strokes revealed herself as potentially lazy or undisciplined. A woman who exceeded the standard ritual demonstrated admirable dedication. The question, "How do you maintain your beautiful hair?" wasn't simply a compliment, it was an interview question for the position of wife. Historians still argue whether Victorian men actually cared as much about hair as beauty culture claimed they did. Certainly, visual attractiveness mattered in mate selection. This has been true across virtually all human cultures. But did specific men really evaluate potential wives based on whether they brushed exactly 100 strokes versus 90 or 110? Probably not with such precision. Yet the cultural anxiety was real, and women made life decisions based on beliefs about what men wanted, regardless of whether those beliefs accurately reflected male preferences. You watch Mr. Pettigrew approach your position near the rose garden. Your heart accelerates. He's going to speak to you. You're acutely conscious of your hair. Is it still perfectly arranged? Has the breeze disturbed it? You resist the urge to touch it. Knowing that would appear vain, he stops before you, executes a proper bow, and begins the expected pleasantries. His eyes do briefly flick to your hair, you're almost certain, before returning to your face. The observation lasts perhaps half a second, but you've spent hundreds of hours preparing for precisely that half second of evaluation. Conversation remains entirely conventional. He mentions the weather. You agree the roses are lovely this year. He inquires about your health. You reciprocate. Nothing of substance is said, yet beneath the surface, an economic negotiation is occurring. He's assessing your value as a potential wife. You're evaluating his suitability as a provider. Your carefully maintained hair functions as evidence in your favour proof of discipline, health, and aesthetic appeal. Whether this brief conversation leads anywhere remains uncertain, but you presented your case as effectively as possible. Later, preparing for bed, you perform your 100 strokes with particular care. Today's encounter with Mr. Pettigrew has reminded you exactly what's at stake. These aren't just brush strokes, they're investments in your future security, efforts toward escaping the limited options available to unmarried women in Victorian society. Your hair must remain perfect, glossy, abundant, and carefully maintained, because it's one of the few assets you control in a world that offers women almost no economic autonomy. So you count 1, 2, 3, knowing that somewhere another young woman is doing exactly the same thing for exactly the same reasons. Both of you hoping that sufficient dedication to this ritual might somehow buy your way into financial stability through the only route society has left: open marriage to a man whose income will support you. You're sitting in your aunt's parlour on a grey January afternoon in 1877, and the room feels heavy with grief that's already 6 months old. Your cousin Margaret died last summer from typhoid fever suddenly, cruelly, at only 19 years old. Today, your aunt has asked you to visit for a specific purpose. And now she's leading you upstairs to her private chambers where she keeps her most precious possessions. She opens a mahogany box inlaid with mother of pearl and removes something that makes your breath catch: an intricate wreath woven from Margaret's hair. Brown strands twisted into delicate flowers and leaves, preserved behind glass in an oval frame. I want you to understand, your aunt says quietly, why I saved every strand from her brush, every lock I trimmed. This is all I have left of her now. This hair, these pieces of her body that she touched every night with 100 strokes, this keeps her close to me. You're looking at Victorian morning culture's strangest practice, where hair transformed from a beauty asset into sacred relic, and the nightly brushing ritual became unexpectedly entwined with death. The Victorian relationship with death was intimate, elaborate, and utterly foreign to modern sensibilities. People died at home, were laid out in parlours, and remained present in households for days before burial. Death wasn't sanitised or hidden in hospitals and funeral homes. It was immediate, visible, unavoidable. In an era of high mortality rates, when disease could claim children, young adults, and parents with terrifying randomness, Victorians developed complex mourning practices to process their constant proximity to loss. Hair, as the only part of the human body that remained relatively unchanged after death, became central to these practices. Hair jewellery and keepsakes had existed before the Victorian era, but the Victorians elevated the practice to an art form and industry. Specialised craftspeople created rings, bracelets, brooches, watch chains, and elaborate framed pieces from human hair, almost always hair from deceased loved ones. The hair was woven, braided, shaped around wire frames, and preserved in ways that could last centuries. These weren't gruesome trophies, but cherished connections to people who'd been lost. Physical remnants that mourners could touch and hold when everything else was gone. You examine your aunt's wreath more closely. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Margaret's hair has been formed into tiny roses, ferns, and forget-me-nots, all arranged in a circular pattern suggesting eternal continuity. The piece probably cost your aunt several guineas, commissioned from a professional hair worker who advertised in ladies' magazines. These artisans possess specialised skills, knowing exactly how to treat hair to prevent deterioration, how to weave it into complex patterns, how to create pieces that would last generations as family heirlooms. The connection to the 100-stroke ritual becomes clear when you understand Victorian hair-saving practices. Every time you brushed your hair, loose strands collected in the bristles. Instead of discarding these, Victorian women saved them in special containers called hair receivers, ceramic or glass vessels with holes in the lids, specifically designed for accumulating shed hair. Over months and years, a substantial quantity accumulated. If the woman died, her family possessed a ready supply of her hair for creating memorial pieces. Your aunt shows you Margaret's hair receiver, still sitting on what was her dressing table. The porcelain container, painted with delicate violets, holds perhaps 2 years' worth of accumulated strands from Margaret's nightly brushing sessions. I used to hear her, your aunt says, voice breaking slightly. Every evening the sound of a brush moving through her hair, 100 strokes, so faithful, so disciplined. Now I have these strands she left behind, and I'm grateful for every single one she saved. The practice extended beyond death. Living family members sometimes exchanged hair jewellery as tokens of affection and connection. A mother might wear a brooch containing locks from all her children. Sweethearts exchanged rings with hair woven inside before parting for long journeys. Friends traded hair bracelets as symbols of eternal friendship. But the most significant use remained mourning, transforming the hair of the dead into objects that kept their memory tangibly present. Victorian mourning culture had strict rules about duration and behaviour. Widows mourned for 2.5 years, progressing through stages from deep mourning, black everything. Minimal social activity to half mourning, some grey and purple allowed. Limited socialising to ordinary mourning, returning to regular life. During this extended period, wearing jewellery made from the deceased's hair was not just acceptable, but expected. It publicly demonstrated proper grief and kept the deceased symbolically present in social spaces. The hairwork industry employed thousands of people during the Victorian era's peak. Professional hair workers advertised their services in newspapers and magazines, offering to create custom pieces from hair clients supplied. Pattern books showed dozens of designs, wreaths, crosses, weeping willows, urns, flowers, even landscapes incorporating human hair into elaborate scenes. Prices range from a few shillings for simple pieces to several pounds for museum-quality work. Some women learned to work their own hair, viewing it as an accomplishment alongside embroidery and painting. Instruction manuals taught techniques for weaving, braiding, and shaping hair into various designs. This allowed families to create memorial pieces themselves. Adding the labour of love to the material connection, a mother who spent hours weaving her daughter's hair into a bracelet performed an act of mourning through craft, channeling grief into creative production. You remember brushing your own hair last night, your 100 strokes performed so routinely you barely thought about them. Now, looking at Margaret's hair transformed into art, you understand those strokes differently. Every time you brushed, you were creating not just beauty for the present, but potential material for the future material that might outlast your body. Preserving some physical trace of your existence long after you're gone, the practice raises unsettling questions. Was keeping and wearing dead people's hair morbid or touching, disturbing or comforting? The answer depends entirely on cultural context. To Victorians, hair jewellery represented love transcending death. Physical connection maintained across the ultimate separation. To modern sensibilities, wearing a dead person's body parts as accessories can seem macabre. Neither perspective is objectively correct, they simply reflect different cultural attitudes toward death, bodies, and remembrance. Historians still argue whether Victorian hairwork practices helped or hindered healthy grief processing. Some scholars suggest that creating and wearing hair jewellery provided productive outlets for mourning, giving bereaved people something concrete to do with their loss. Others argue the practices prolonged grief, keeping the deceased too present and preventing mourners from moving forward. The debate remains unresolved, partly because grief itself resists simple categorization as healthy or unhealthy. The commercial aspect of mourning hairwork sometimes verged on exploitation. Unscrupulous dealers sold genuine hair pieces that actually contained hair from strangers, often poor women who sold their hair for income, or even horsehair dyed to appear human. Fraudulent memorial jewellery created additional grief for families who discovered they weren't actually possessing their loved one's remains, but some anonymous substitute. The market's profitability invited dishonesty. Your aunt carefully returns Margaret's wreath to its box, handling it with reverence reserved for sacred objects. Sometimes I imagine I can feel her in this hair, she says. The same hair she brushed every night, that I sometimes brushed for her when we travelled together. It comforts me to keep it close. You recognise this as genuine solace, not macabre obsession. Your aunt has found meaning in preserving physical traces of her daughter, and the 100-stroke ritual that seemed purely aesthetic took on unexpected significance after death, transformed hair from beauty tool into memorial. The practice of saving hair continued well into the 20th century, though it gradually declined as attitudes toward death changed and Victorian mourning culture's elaborate rituals fell out of fashion. Today, most people find the idea of hair jewellery strange at best, disturbing at worst. We've lost the cultural framework that made such objects meaningful. The shared understanding that made wearing your mother's hair in a locket seem natural and appropriate rather than creepy. But in your aunt's parlour on this grey afternoon, surrounded by black-bordered mourning stationery and portraits draped with dark cloth, Margaret's hair wreath makes perfect sense. It's beautiful, carefully crafted, and genuinely precious not for its monetary value but for its intimate connection to a beloved person who no longer exists except in memory and in these preserved strands. Your 100 strokes tonight will carry new significance. You're not just maintaining beauty, you're creating material that might someday matter to people who love you, leaving traces that could outlast your body by centuries. You descend the stairs, your aunt's hand on your shoulder, both of you connected through shared understanding of Victorian mourning's strange practices. Outside, London continues its daily business omnibuses rattling past, vendors calling their wares, life proceeding despite individual losses. Inside, Margaret's hair rests in its box, the physical remnant of thousands of evenings spent brushing, counting, maintaining the beauty that death ended but preservation extended indefinitely into an uncertain future. You're lying on a fainting couch in Dr. Pemberton's consulting room, and he's asking the strangest questions. Do you experience nervousness? Yes. You admit, doesn't everyone, do thoughts race through your mind unbidden? Certainly, especially at night. Do you feel occasionally overwhelmed by modern life's demands? Of course, Doctor. Pemberton nods gravely, making notes in his leather-bound casebook, and delivers his diagnosis with absolute confidence. You suffer from neurasthenia, that peculiarly Victorian nervous disorder that seems to afflict every woman who admits to feeling anything other than placid contentment. His prescribed treatment surprises you in addition to the expected recommendations about rest and fresh air. He insists you must be absolutely religious about your nightly hair brushing routine. 100 strokes minimum, he says firmly. The rhythmic motion calms the nervous system, regulates disturbed humours, and provides meditative focus that your scattered mind desperately requires. Think of it as therapeutic exercise for your overwrought nerves. You're sceptical, but you're also frightened by his diagnosis, so you resolve to follow his advice. Tonight, your 100 strokes will carry medical significance beyond mere beauty maintenance. The Victorian medical establishment's understanding of mental health was simultaneously fascinating and appalling by modern standards. Doctors recognised that people, especially women, experience psychological distress, anxiety, depression, and what we might now call stress-related disorders. But their explanations and treatments reflected 19th century assumptions about bodies, gender, and illness that seem bizarre today. Women were considered particularly susceptible to nervous complaints due to their supposedly delicate constitutions, reproductive systems that supposedly diverted energy from their brains, and emotional natures that left them vulnerable to psychological disturbance. Neurasthenia, literally nerve weakness, became the catch-all diagnosis for vague complaints that included fatigue, anxiety, headaches, depression, and generalized malaise. The condition was supposedly caused by the excessive demands of modern civilization, particularly affecting sensitive, refined people whose nervous systems couldn't handle the pace of 19th century life. Women were diagnosed with neurasthenia far more frequently than men, and treatment recommendations reflected deeply gendered assumptions about what women needed. The connection between hairbrushing and nervous disorders appeared repeatedly in Victorian medical literature. An 1869 text titled Diseases of Modern Life devoted several pages to the therapeutic benefits of rhythmic, repetitive activities for calming agitated nerves. Hairbrushing was specifically mentioned alongside knitting, walking, and embroidery as activities that combined gentle physical exertion with meditative focus, supposedly ideal for treating nervous complaints. You return home from doctor. Pemberton's office feeling both validated your distress has been acknowledged as real and concerned about what this diagnosis means for your future. Will you be labelled as hysterical, weak, or mentally unstable? Victorian society viewed nervous disorders with suspicion, sometimes considering them signs of moral failing or hereditary degeneracy. Yet, simultaneously, a certain type of refined nervousness was almost fashionable among upper-class women, suggesting sensitivity and delicate breeding rather than weakness. That evening you approach your 100 strokes with new intentionality. Instead of letting your mind wander as usual, you focus completely on the sensation bristles against scalp, hair sliding through the brush, your arm's rhythmic motion. Doctor. Pemberton said to think of it as meditation, though that's not a word Victorians typically use. You're supposed to clear your mind. Focus on the repetition. Let the counting occupy your consciousness completely. 1, 2, 3. The strokes become a kind of mantra. The concept wasn't entirely nonsensical. Modern psychology recognizes that repetitive, rhythmic activities can indeed reduce anxiety and promote relaxation. Meditation, deep breathing exercises, and progressive muscle relaxation all use similar principles, focusing attention on simple, repeated actions to quiet racing thoughts and activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Victorian doctors stumbled onto something real, even if their explanations involved obsolete theories about humours and nerve force. Some Victorian physicians took the connection further, arguing that the specific act of hairbrushing provided benefits beyond general rhythmic activity. They claimed brushing stimulated scalp nerves in ways that sent calming signals throughout the entire nervous system. One particularly imaginative 1873 medical text suggested that scalp stimulation draws nervous energy upward and outward, releasing it through the hair tips rather than allowing it to accumulate and cause internal disturbance. This was complete nonsense, but it sold books and convinced patients to comply with treatment. Stroke 42. You're finding the focused attention more difficult than expected. Your mind keeps drifting to tomorrow's social obligations, your sister's upcoming wedding, the awkward interaction you had with Mrs. Harrison last week. Each time you notice your thoughts wandering, you bring attention back to the counting. This is harder than simply brushing mindlessly while thinking about other things. Perhaps that's the point, forcing your anxious mind to focus on something simple and immediate, rather than spiralling into worried speculation. The treatment of female nervous disorders in Victorian medicine often involved infantilizing women and restricting their autonomy. The famous rest cure developed by Dr. S. Weir Mitchell in the 1870s prescribed complete bed rest, isolation, and forced feeding for women diagnosed with neurasthenia or hysteria. Patients were forbidden from reading, writing, or any intellectual activity, supposedly to conserve their limited nervous energy. The treatment was often traumatic. sometimes driving women to genuine mental breakdowns rather than curing their original complaints. Hair brushing, in contrast, represented a gentler approach that allowed women to participate actively in their own treatment, instead of passive suffering through rest cures or submitting to more invasive treatments. Some doctors still practice bloodletting or prescribe dangerous drugs like laudanum. You could take charge by simply brushing your hair with proper dedication. This element of control might have provided genuine psychological benefit, giving women something concrete to do when they felt powerless over their symptoms. Historians still argue whether Victorian doctors genuinely believed in these hair-brushing treatments or simply prescribed them as harmless placebos. Some physicians' writings suggest authentic conviction that rhythmic brushing provided therapeutic value. Others seem more cynical, perhaps recognizing that anxious patients needed to feel they were doing something, and hair brushing was safe enough compared to alternatives like mercury treatments or electrical shock therapy that other doctors employed. Stroke 67. You're developing a slight ache in your shoulder, but you push through. Doctor. Pemberton emphasized that consistency mattered more than anything. Skipping even one night of treatment might reverse your progress toward nervous stability. This creates additional anxiety. Ironically, the treatment for nervousness itself becomes something to feel nervous about. What if you're too tired one evening? What if you travel and forget your brush? Will your nervous condition worsen? The prescription has transformed a beauty ritual into a medical necessity. With all the pressure that implies, some Victorian women found genuine relief through hair-brushing routines. Whether because the practice actually helped or because placebo effects are remarkably powerful. When you believe a treatment will work, it sometimes does, even if the mechanism is purely psychological. A woman who brushed her hair faithfully every night, believing it would calm her nerves, might indeed feel calmer not because of any direct physiological effect of brushing, but because she had given herself a nightly ritual that provided structure, routine, and the comfort of taking action against her symptoms. The gendered aspect of these treatments deserves emphasis. Doctors prescribed hair brushing specifically for women's nervous complaints, never suggesting men brush their hair for mental health benefits. This reflected Victorian assumptions that women's psychological distress stemmed from their femininity itself, their reproductive systems, emotional natures, and roles in society. Treatments were designed to reinforce traditional feminine activities and appearance maintenance, essentially prescribing femininity as medicine for problems supposedly caused by being female. Alternative voices occasionally question these approaches. Some early feminist thinkers suggested that women's nervous complaints might result from restricted lives, lack of meaningful occupation, and society's suffocating expectations, rather than delicate constitutions requiring special treatment. They argued that intellectual engagement and expanded opportunities would prove more therapeutic than enforced rest and beauty rituals. These views remained marginalised throughout most of the Victorian era, though they gained traction toward the period's end, stroke 95. You're nearly finished with tonight's therapeutic session. Do you feel calmer? Perhaps slightly. The focused attention did quiet your racing thoughts temporarily. Whether that resulted from the brushing itself or simply from 20 minutes of forced meditation remains unclear. Regardless, you've complied with doctor's orders, and there's comfort in that you're doing everything you can to address your nervous condition, following expert medical advice even when you're unsure whether it actually helps. You set down your brush and examine your reflection. Your hair looks glossy and well maintained, as always. But tonight you're supposed to see beyond appearance to the therapeutic benefit you've received. Doctor. Pemberton would say your nervous system has been calmed. your overwrought nerves soothed by rhythmic stimulation and meditative focus. You're not entirely convinced, but you're also not entirely skeptical. In an era before effective psychiatric medications or evidence-based psychotherapy, this is what treatment looks like: a mixture of folk wisdom, genuine observation, pseudoscience, and desperate hope that something, anything, might help people suffering from psychological distress that their society barely understands. Tomorrow night, you'll repeat the ritual, and the night after that, for as long as Dr. Pemberton considers it medically necessary. Your 100 strokes will carry the weight of treatment, not just routine. Your hairbrush has been transformed from beauty tool into medical device. Your nightly ritual from vanity into therapy. Whether it actually helps your nervous condition or simply gives you something to focus on beside your anxiety. The result might be the same: a woman finding whatever comfort she can in a world that offers limited options for addressing psychological pain. You're reading the latest issue of the Lady's Companion, and a full-page advertisement catches your eye with bold promises that seem almost magical. Madame Beauvai's miraculous hair. Restorative transform thin, lifeless hair into luxuriant tresses in only 3 weeks when combined with our patented brushing method. Results are guaranteed or your money refunded. The advertisement features testimonials from satisfied customers with names like Mrs. A of Yorkshire and Miss C of London, each claiming the hair doubled in thickness after using this miracle tonic. The price is steep 7 shillings and 6pence for a single bottle, but the advertisement insists you must follow their specific brushing technique 100 strokes nightly using only downward motions, pausing every 25 strokes to apply additional tonic. You're skeptical but also tempted. Your hair is perfectly adequate, yet the advertisement has somehow convinced you it's desperately inadequate. This is Victorian patent medicine at its finest, preying on insecurity, making wild claims, and tying products to the sacred 100-stroke ritual to exploit women's existing beauty anxieties. The patent medicine industry exploded during the Victorian era, becoming a multi-million-pound business that sold everything from consumption cures to complexion improvers to hair restoratives. These products operated in a largely unregulated market where manufacturers could claim virtually anything without proving effectiveness or safety. No government agency tested ingredients or verified advertising claims. If a company said their potion grew hair, prevented baldness, or restored youthful colour, they could print that claim in newspapers and magazines without consequences unless someone died. And sometimes, even then, hair tonics and restoratives represented one of the most profitable segments of the patent medicine market. Victorian anxiety is about hair, its connection to health, beauty, social standing, and marriage prospects created perfect conditions for exploitative marketing. Companies developed hundreds of products, each promising miraculous results through secret formulas that were usually just alcohol, perfume, and perhaps some herbal extracts of dubious value. You examine the advertisement more carefully. Madame Beauvais, almost certainly a fictional character created by male business owners. As most Madame Beauty products were supposedly developed, her formula using ancient French court secrets combined with modern scientific advancement. The advertisement shows an illustration of a woman with impossibly thick, flowing hair that cascades past her waist, hair so abundant it seems physically implausible. This is aspirational imagery designed to make your own perfectly normal hair seem inadequate by comparison. The connection to the 100-stroke ritual was deliberate marketing genius. Women were already brushing nightly, already invested in the practice through years of habit and social pressure. Patent medicine manufacturers simply hijacked this existing behavior, claiming their products worked best when combined with specific brushing techniques. This created perfect recurring demand. You needed the product, and you needed to keep using it consistently through the nightly ritual, creating ongoing sales rather than one-time purchases. Some hair tonics contained ingredients that were genuinely harmful. Lead mercury and arsenic appeared in various Victorian beauty products, including hair treatments. These toxic substances could cause serious health problems ranging from hair loss, ironic for a hair restorative, to organ damage and death. But Victorian chemistry wasn't advanced enough for most consumers to identify dangerous ingredients, and manufacturers rarely listed complete formulas anyway, claiming proprietary secrets. Other products were simply useless. Many hair tonics consisted primarily of alcohol, sometimes up to 50% mixed with perfumes to smell pleasant and plant extracts to seem medicinal. The alcohol provided a slight tingling sensation on the scalp that felt like something was happening, convincing users the product was working even when it did nothing. The perfume made hair smell nice temporarily. The plant extracts were typically harmless, but also ineffective. Women paid premium prices for what was essentially perfumed alcohol. You've heard stories about patent medicine fraud from your more cynical friends. Susan's mother spent £2 on a hair growth serum that produced no results whatsoever. Margaret tried a colour-restoring tonic that supposedly eliminated grey, but actually just temporarily stained the scalp, making her appear bruised until it washed out. Yet the industry thrived because success stories, real or invented, spread more effectively than warnings about failures. The testimonials in advertisements were almost always fabricated. Mrs. A. of Yorkshire and Miss C. of London were probably created in the manufacturer's office. Not real customers reporting genuine experiences. Occasionally companies paid people for testimonials, but more often they simply invented them entirely. Victorian advertising operated with minimal ethical constraints, and manufacturers felt no obligation to tell the truth as long as they weren't caught in obvious lies. Some advertisements targeted specific insecurities with ruthless precision. One hair tonic marketed specifically to unmarried women, claiming thin hair means thin prospects, restore your crowning glory and attract the husband you deserve. Another targeted mothers worried about heredity. Don't pass your hair problems to your children. Strengthen your locks. Now for future generations. These advertisements identified women's deepest fears and presented products as solutions. Regardless of whether the products actually did anything, the brushing instructions that accompanied these products became increasingly elaborate and specific. Manufacturers claimed their tonics required particular application methods. Some insisted on upward strokes against hair's natural direction. Others demanded precise circular motions on the scalp. Still others prescribed alternating between fast and slow brushing speeds. These complicated routines served multiple purposes. They made the product seem more scientific and sophisticated. They kept customers focused on the ritual rather than questioning whether results actually appeared. And they provided ready excuses if products failed. You must not have followed the instructions correctly. You notice that Madame Beauvai's advertisement includes a lengthy sidebar titled "Common Brushing Mistakes That Prevent Hair Growth." This is clever manipulation. It preemptively blames customers for any failure while positioning the product as scientifically advanced and requiring proper technique. The mistakes listed include brushing too quickly, insufficient pressure on the scalp, neglecting the temples and behind the ears, and failing to brush in complete darkness to allow hair follicles maximum rest during treatment. That last one is pure nonsense. But it sounds authoritative enough that some women will believe it. Historians still argue whether patent medicine manufacturers genuinely believed their own advertising or knowingly committed fraud. Some evidence suggests true believers existed people who thought their herbal mixtures or chemical concoctions actually worked, perhaps fooled by selective attention to positive results while ignoring failures. Other manufacturers were clearly cynical fraudsters who knew they were selling worthless products but didn't care as long as profits rolled in. Government regulation eventually came. Though slowly, Britain's Pharmacy Act of 1868 attempted to control dangerous substances but left loopholes that patent medicines exploited. Later legislation gradually increased oversight, requiring ingredient disclosure and limiting false advertising. But throughout most of the Victorian era, the market remained largely unregulated. Caveat emptor applied absolutely, and women navigating beauty product claims had little protection beyond their own skepticism. The relationship between patent medicines and the 100-stroke ritual reveals how commercial interests shaped intimate personal practices. What might have remained a simple folk tradition, brushing your hair thoroughly before bed, became entangled with product marketing. Pseudo-scientific claims and elaborate routines designed to sell merchandise. The ritual itself became a vehicle for commerce, with manufacturers constantly inventing new ways to convince women they needed special products, tools, or techniques beyond basic brushing. You set down the lady's companion, having decided against purchasing Madame Bove's miracle tonic. Your skepticism has won out over temptation, at least for today. But you know you'll encounter dozens more advertisements promising similar miracles, each one expertly crafted to exploit your insecurities and existing beauty routines. The patent medicine industry has perfected the art of making adequate seem inadequate, normal seem deficient, and simple seem insufficient without their expensive interventions. Tonight, when you perform your 100 strokes, you'll use only plain water if your hair needs dampening. No tonics or restoratives or miracle formulas. Your hair will likely turn out exactly the same as it would have with Madame Bove's product, healthy enough, glossy enough, adequate for your purposes. The real miracle isn't in bottles sold by patent medicine hucksters. It's in your body's own ability to produce healthy hair when given basic care, reasonable nutrition, gentle maintenance, and yes, some regular brushing to distribute natural oils and remove tangles. Victorian women didn't need most of what they were sold. But the industry profited enormously by convincing them otherwise, turning the 100-stroke ritual into an opportunity for endless commercial exploitation of feminine anxiety. You're sitting in a photographer's studio on a Tuesday morning in 1879, trying desperately to remain perfectly still while the photographer adjusts his camera beneath its black cloth. He's already warned you that the exposure will take several seconds. Any movement will create a blur that ruins the image. You're acutely aware of your hair, which took 90 minutes to arrange this morning into the elaborate style currently pinned atop your head. Every strand must be perfect because this photograph will be permanent, unchangeable. A frozen record of your appearance that might survive for decades or even centuries. Your descendants will examine this image, judging your beauty, your fashion sense, your attention to proper feminine maintenance. Last night you completed not 100 but 200 brushstrokes in preparation for today's appointment, determined that your hair should appear flawless in its photographic immortality. The advent of photography transformed the 100-stroke ritual from private discipline into public performance, because now your hair's condition could be captured and scrutinized forever. Photography arrived as a commercial technology in the 1840s and became increasingly accessible throughout the Victorian era. Early daguerreotypes were expensive and rare, but by the 1870s and 1880s, middle-class families could afford professional portraits. Photography studios opened in every significant town, offering services ranging from simple carte de visite to elaborate family portraits. For the first time in human history, ordinary people could preserve accurate visual records of themselves, and this revolutionary technology changed how Victorians thought about appearance, beauty, and grooming. Before photography, only the wealthy commission-painted portraits, and those paintings could be flattering or stylized according to artistic convention and patron preference. A mediocre hairdo could be improved by a talented painter, but photography captured reality with unforgiving accuracy. Every stray hair, every uneven texture, every flaw became permanently visible. Victorian women approached photographic appointments with the same anxiety modern people feel before important events, knowing their appearance would be scrutinized and preserved. The photographer emerges from beneath his black cloth and instructs you to tilt your head slightly left. He's concerned about how the light catches your hair, too much glare, and the detail will be lost. Too much shadow, and your carefully arranged curls will appear flat and lifeless. Professional photographers developed expertise in lighting hair to show its texture, volume, and style to best advantage. Studios invested in reflectors, diffusers, and careful window positioning to ensure optimal hair presentation in portraits. Your hair's preparation for this photograph began weeks ago. Really, you've been extra diligent with your 100-stroke ritual. Knowing the appointment approached, you avoided experimental hairstyles that might damage your hair. You consulted with your mother and friends about the most flattering arrangement for photographic purposes. This morning you washed your hair, a rare occurrence, outside your regular bathing schedule because photographic studios recommended clean hair for optimal image quality. The entire enterprise feels like preparing for the most important social event of your life. Except the audience won't be people at a single gathering, but potentially anyone who sees this photograph over the next 100 years. Photography created new anxieties about hair volume and thickness. In person, clever styling and favourable lighting could make thin hair appear more abundant. But cameras captured depth and shadow with such precision that photographic evidence of hair quality became almost forensic. Women with genuinely thick, healthy hair photographed beautifully, their locks showing impressive volume and texture. Women with thinner hair found their deficiencies immortalized on film, creating intense motivation to maintain hair health through rigorous nightly routines. The portrait photograph industry spawned its own beauty guidance, specifically focused on photographic appearance. Articles in ladies' magazines explained how to look your best in photograph, with hair care prominently featured. These guides recommended increasing your brushstrokes before scheduled sittings, using pomades or light oils to add shine that would register well on film, and arranging hair in styles that showed both volume and detail rather than flat, severe arrangements that made heads appear small. The photographer is ready. Please remain absolutely still, he instructs, removing the lens cap. You freeze, barely breathing, conscious of every muscle in your neck and shoulders, desperately hoping nothing about your hair has shifted in the past few minutes. The seconds stretch out interminably. You can't see what the camera sees that will only be revealed after the plate is developed. Hours or days from now, you simply have to trust that your months of careful hair maintenance, your exhaustive preparation, and your morning styling efforts will translate into a flattering photographic representation. Historians still argue whether photography actually changed beauty standards or simply made existing standards more visible and enforceable. Certainly, the technology allowed for unprecedented comparison. Women could examine photographs of actresses, socialites, and admired beauties, studying their hair in detail that stage performances or distant observations never permitted. This might have intensified competitive beauty culture, making women more aware of how their hair compared to idealized examples. The exposure completes. The photographer replaces the lens cap and emerges once more, nodding with satisfaction. Excellent stillness. Madam, I believe we've captured a fine image. but you won't know until the photograph is developed. This uncertainty creates its own particular anxiety. You've invested time, effort, and money into this sitting, and if your hair looks disappointing in the final image, there's nothing to be done. Unlike painted portraits, photographs can't be altered or improved. What the camera saw is what you'll have forever. Photography studios sometimes retouched images, particularly for wealthy clients willing to pay extra. A skilled retoucher could enhance hair volume, smooth flyaway strands, or add highlights that the camera didn't quite capture. But this process was expensive and not always successful. Heavy retouching could make photographs look artificial and obviously manipulated. Most middle-class customers received unretouched images, for better or worse, showing their hair exactly as it appeared under studio lighting on that particular day. The rise of carte de visite photographs in the 1860s and 1870s created additional hair maintenance pressure. These small, card-mounted photographs were designed for social exchange. You distributed your cart to friends, family, and acquaintances who displayed collections in special albums. Your hair appeared in dozens of homes, examined by countless people. Compared to other women's carts, this transformed private grooming into extraordinarily public display. Poor hair maintenance became socially costly in new ways, as unflattering photographs circulated beyond your control. Some Victorian women avoided photography entirely, too anxious about permanent visual records of their appearance. These women missed out on historical preservation today. We have no photographic record of millions of 19th century people who lived, loved, and died without ever sitting for a camera. But their anxiety was understandable. Photography created unprecedented accountability for appearance, making visible what had previously been transient and debatable. You leave the studio with a receipt for picking up your finished photograph in 3 days. Those 3 days will stretch out with anticipation and dread. What will you see when you examine the final image? Will your hair look as glorious as you hope, justifying all those hours of nightly brushing, or will the photograph reveal some flaw you've overlooked? Some imperfection that becomes permanent record of your inadequacy? When you collect the photograph later that week, you examine it with intense scrutiny. Your hair looks good, not perfect. You notice a small section near your left temple that appears less full than you'd like, and the light has created a slight glare on your crown. But overall, your hair photographs well, showing volume, texture, and the careful arrangement you laboured to achieve. This image will be mounted in your family's album, displayed to visitors, perhaps sent to distant relatives. Your hair has passed the photographic test, proving that your disciplined maintenance routine produces results visible even under the camera's unforgiving eye. Photography changed Victorian beauty culture profoundly, making appearance a matter of permanent visual record rather than fleeting impression and selective memory. The 100-stroke ritual gained additional significance in this new context. It wasn't just about looking good at today's social event, but about maintaining hair health for the eventual photographic session that should preserve your appearance for posterity. Every night, as you completed your strokes, you were potentially preparing for an image that your great-grandchildren might someday examine, judging your beauty across a century's distance. The pressure was enormous. But so was the vanity, the secret hope that your carefully maintained hair might prove beautiful enough to be admired long after you were gone, preserved not in painted idealization but in photographic reality. You're watching your 6-year-old daughter Emily sitting before the nursery mirror, and your heart aches with complicated emotions. Your mother sits behind her, brush in hand, beginning the nightly ritual that Emily dreads and you remember dreading at exactly her age. 1, your mother counts aloud, pulling the brush through Emily's fine blonde hair. The child winces not from pain, The brushing is gentle, but from the knowledge that 99 more strokes remain before she's released. Must we do this every single night? Emily asks in her small voice, already knowing the answer. Yes, your mother replies firmly. This is how we train you to be a proper young lady. Discipline, patience, endurance, these virtues begin with a hairbrush. You want to intervene, to spare your daughter this tedious ordeal, but you also remember how thoroughly your own childhood brushing sessions prepared you for adult life's demands. The 100-stroke ritual wasn't just hair care, it was character education, a nightly lesson in feminine submission, persistence, and the acceptance of discomfort for the sake of beauty and social expectations. Victorian childhood was a time of rigorous training and discipline, quite different from modern ideas about child-centered parenting and respecting children's preferences. Children, especially girls, were being prepared for their adult roles through constant instruction, correction, and the development of appropriate habits. Hair brushing became one of many daily rituals that taught important lessons about endurance, obedience, and the prioritization of appearance over personal comfort. Most Victorian girls began the 100-stroke routine around age 5 or 6, when their hair grew long enough to require significant maintenance. Mothers, grandmothers, or nannies performed the brushing for young children, but the expectation was clear: the child must sit still, remain quiet, and accept the lengthy process without complaint. Fidgeting, whining, or attempting to escape before completion resulted in discipline, sometimes additional strokes as punishment, sometimes other consequences that reinforced the lesson that feminine beauty maintenance was non-negotiable. Your mother reaches stroke 25. Emily's eyes are watering slightly, not from pain, but from frustration and the overwhelming tedium of forced stillness. She's an energetic child who loves running in the garden, playing with her wooden toys, and acting out elaborate stories with her dolls. Being trapped on a stool for 15 to 20 minutes of brushing feels like torture to her active temperament. But this is precisely the point. According to Victorian child-rearing philosophy, children must learn to control their natural impulses, to prioritize duty over desire, and to accept necessary discomforts with grace. The pedagogical theory behind childhood hair brushing routines was explicitly articulated in Victorian parenting manuals. The Young Lady's Guide to Deportment, published in 1872, devoted an entire chapter to the character-building benefits of beauty rituals. The author argued that girls who learned patience during nightly hair brushing developed the emotional regulation necessary for managing demanding husbands, difficult servants, and the countless frustrations of adult feminine life. The brush became an educational tool as much as a grooming implement. Some mothers turned the brushing session into bonding time, using the captive audience to share stories, provide moral instruction, or simply talk about the day's events. These mothers made the ritual more bearable through distraction and connection. Emily might have preferred this approach. Your own mother sometimes told you stories during brushing, making the time pass more quickly and creating positive associations with what was otherwise tedious. But your mother, Emily's grandmother, takes a stricter approach. She believes the discomfort itself teaches valuable lessons. You won't always enjoy what life requires of you, she tells Emily, around stroke 47. Learning to do difficult things without complaint is essential for a woman. Your husband will expect it. Society will demand it. We prepare you now for those future requirements. The Victorian worldview was explicit. Childhood existed primarily as preparation for adult roles, and those roles were clearly defined by gender. The physical demands on young girls shouldn't be underestimated. Sitting absolutely still for 15 to 20 minutes is genuinely challenging for a 6-year-old whose natural inclination is constant movement. Some children developed remarkable patience through these nightly sessions, others never quite adjusted, spending decades of their lives resenting the ritual even as they performed it faithfully. The psychological impact varied tremendously depending on the child's temperament, the adult's approach, and the surrounding family culture. Historians still argue whether Victorian childhood hairbrushing was primarily abusive or primarily educational. Modern sensibilities often view it as unnecessarily harsh. Why force young children through tedious rituals that serve no real purpose beyond enforcing gender conformity? But within Victorian context, the practice reflected genuine attempts to prepare daughters for lives where appearance, patience, and endurance of discomfort were survival skills. Whether that justifies the practice remains debatable, but understanding the intention provides important context. Some progressive Victorian voices questioned whether such rigorous beauty training was appropriate for young children. Early feminist writers occasionally criticized the practice, suggesting that girls should be allowed more freedom in childhood and that beauty rituals could wait until adolescence when girls themselves might appreciate their purpose. These critiques remained marginal throughout most of the era. However, with mainstream parenting culture continuing to emphasize early training in feminine duties, stroke 68. Emily has gone quiet, her small face resigned. She's learned through experience that protest accomplishes nothing except extending the ordeal through the addition of punishment strokes. This is learned helplessness. Technically, the recognition that resistance is futile and acceptance is the path of least suffering. Victorian educators would have called it the successful inculcation of proper feminine submission. Modern child psychologists might see it as the breaking of a child's natural spirit. Both interpretations contain truth. Your own memories of childhood brushing sessions are mixed. You remember the boredom, the burning arm fatigue when you grew old enough to brush your own hair, the resentment at being trapped when you wanted to read or play. But you also remember the satisfaction of completing the task, the pride in your glossy hair that elicited compliments from adults, the growing sense of competence as you mastered the technique and eventually performed the ritual independently. The experience taught you persistence, certainly, though whether that lesson was worth the cost remains an open question. Some Victorian girls actively rebelled against the 100-stroke requirement. Diaries and letters occasionally reveal acts of quiet resistance pretending to count honestly, while actually performing only 70 or 80 strokes, rushing through the ritual so quickly that it barely constituted proper brushing, or finding excuses to skip nights when parental supervision was lax. These small rebellions demonstrated agency within constrained circumstances, though they also created guilt and anxiety about deception. The transition from having one's hair brushed by adults to performing the ritual independently marked an important developmental milestone. Around age 10 or 11, many Victorian girls assumed full responsibility for their own 100 strokes. This was simultaneously liberation, no more sitting captive while someone else controlled the process and burden. Now you had to muster the discipline yourself. Without external enforcement, some girls thrived with this independence. Others struggled with self-regulation and continued requiring parental oversight well into adolescence. Stroke 89, nearly finished. Emily's posture has slumped slightly from its initial rigid correctness, and your mother gently reminds her to sit up straight. Even exhausted compliance must maintain proper form. That's part of the lesson too. You watch this scene that you experienced countless times in your own childhood, and you wonder what Emily will remember years from now. Will she appreciate the discipline instilled through these nightly sessions? Will she resent the tedious imposition? Will she impose the same ritual on her own daughters when the time comes? perpetuating the tradition through another generation, the 100 strokes complete. Your mother sets down the brush and Emily immediately slides from the stool. Freedom regained. Her hair looks beautiful, glossy, smooth and well maintained. Whether the result justifies the process depends entirely on whose values you apply to the question. By Victorian standards, the session was entirely successful. The child's hair was properly cared for, character-building discipline was enforced, and feminine submission was practiced. By modern child welfare standards, the practice might seem like unnecessary imposition of adult vanity on children too young to consent or understand. Emily runs off to play in the final hour before bedtime. Her ordeal complete for another day. Tomorrow night the ritual will repeat, and the night after that, and after that, for years to come, until it becomes so habitual that Emily can barely remember a time when she didn't spend 15 minutes nightly brushing her hair. The ritual will shape her, teaching lessons about patience, beauty, discipline, and the demands society places on female bodies. Whether those lessons ultimately benefit or harm her depends on countless variables: her temperament, her future circumstances, her ability to navigate Victorian womanhood's complex requirements. But ready or not, willing or not, she's being trained for that future, one brushstroke at a time. You're sitting in a London tea shop on a spring afternoon in 1924, and you can barely stop staring at the young woman 2 tables away. She's perhaps 23 years old, dressed in a dropped-waist dress that would have scandalized your mother. And her hair, her hair has been cut short in the new bob style that's sweeping through post-war Britain like a revolution. Her hair barely reaches her jawline, sleek and modern, completely defying every principle you were raised to believe about feminine beauty and proper hair maintenance. You spent 40 years faithfully performing your 100 strokes every single night, growing and maintaining the long hair that Victorian culture insisted was essential to womanhood. And now, in less than a decade since the war ended, everything has changed. Young women are cutting off their crowning glory, walking into barbershops and salons, emerging with short, boyish cuts that would have been unthinkable in your youth. You wonder, did anyone in 1870 ever secretly resent the tyranny of the 100-stroke ritual? Did Victorian women quietly rebel against the expectation that they'd spend hours weekly maintaining hair they never particularly wanted in the first place? The answer, based on surviving diaries, letters, and memoirs, is yes, some Victorian women did resent the 100-stroke requirement, though they rarely expressed that resentment openly during the era itself. The social pressure to conform was intense, and publicly questioning established beauty practices could mark a woman as unfeminine, radical, or socially dangerous. But private writings occasionally reveal frustration with the time-consuming ritual, skepticism about its supposed benefits, and resentment at the expectations that consumed so much of women's lives. A diary entry from 1867 written by a middle-class Manchester woman named Elizabeth Garnett survives in a local historical archive. Another evening wasted in this tedious brushing ritual. My arm aches, my head throbs, and for what? So that tomorrow's callers might approve my glossy locks and judge me sufficiently feminine. Sometimes I dream of taking scissors to the whole business and being done with it. But of course I won't. Respectability demands its price, and I've no choice but to pay. Elizabeth never did cut her hair. She maintained proper Victorian length until her death in 1903, but her private frustration was real and probably shared by many women who lack the courage or circumstances to rebel. Some Victorian women did take small acts of resistance. A few cut their hair shorter than fashion dictated, claiming practical concerns or medical necessity as justification. Others gradually reduced their nightly brushstrokes from 100 to 75 or 50, reasoning that some brushing was sufficient even if not optimal. These quiet rebellions rarely attracted notice after all. Who was counting another woman's private brushstrokes, but they represented genuine agency within constrained circumstances. The advent of short hair for women in the 1920s represented a profound cultural shift that went far beyond hairstyles. The Great War had changed everything. Women had worked in factories, driven ambulances, and managed farms while men fought. They'd proven capable of tasks previously considered masculine, and they tasted independence that peacetime threatened to revoke. Cutting their hair became symbolic rejection of Victorian constraints, a visible declaration that the old rules no longer applied. You remember the first time you saw a woman with bobbed hair, around 1921. The shock was visceral. It felt almost indecent, like seeing someone walking outdoors in their undergarments. This woman had deliberately destroyed what Victorian culture considered her primary beauty asset, her crowning glory, the hair that should have received careful nightly maintenance from childhood through old age. The bob represented everything your generation had been taught: to avoid mannish appearance, rejection of feminine duties, modernity run amok. Yet now, just 3 years later, bobbed hair is everywhere. The young woman in the tea shop isn't an outlier or a radical, she's fashionable, current, thoroughly modern, and you must admit, from a practical standpoint, her short hair requires a fraction of the maintenance time that your long hair demands. She probably spends 5 minutes daily on hair care compared to your 30 or 40 minutes. That's hours weekly, days annually, weeks over a lifetime that she has reclaimed from beauty maintenance. Historians still argue whether the bob truly liberated women or simply replaced one set of beauty standards with another equally demanding regime. Certainly, maintaining a fashionable bob required regular professional cuts, styling products, and careful attention to shape. But the time investment was substantially lower than Victorian hair care, and the message was different modern efficiency rather than patient feminine submission. Some Victorian-era women welcomed short hair as liberation from decades of tyranny. A 1923 magazine article quoted a 50-year-old woman who'd recently bobbed her hair. "For 40 years I brushed obediently, endured headaches from heavy hair pinned atop my head, and wasted countless hours on maintenance that benefited no one. Last month I walked into a barber shop and asked him to cut it all off. He was shocked. I was exhilarated. I've reclaimed years of my life." The article presented her as admirably modern, though just a decade earlier she would have been dismissed as dangerously unfeminine. Other women of your generation viewed short hair as tragedy, the destruction of something beautiful and traditionally feminine in favour of ugly modernity. These women kept their long hair, continued their nightly brushing routines, and mourned what they saw as culture's degradation. You find yourself somewhere in between intellectually understanding that short hair offers practical advantages, but emotionally attached to the long hair you've maintained since childhood, unable to imagine yourself without it. The transition wasn't universally smooth or accepted. Conservative voices condemned bobbed hair as immoral, unfeminine, and socially destructive. Some employers refused to hire women with short hair. Churches preached against it, citing biblical passages about women's hair being their glory. A few husbands left wives who cut their hair without permission, viewing it as unforgivable violation of feminine duty. The backlash was intense. Though ultimately unsuccessful, fashion and cultural change won over traditional objections. What's most fascinating is how quickly the transition occurred. In 1918, long hair was nearly universal among respectable women. By 1925, short hair dominated among young women in cities. A fundamental aspect of feminine appearance that had remained relatively stable for centuries changed within less than a decade. This suggests that Victorian hair practices weren't as universally beloved as public discourse suggested. Many women abandoned them immediately once social permission emerged. The 100-stroke ritual became increasingly obsolete as short hair proliferated. You can't really perform 100 brush strokes on hair that barely reaches your jawline. The physical mechanics don't work the same way. The ritual had been designed for long hair, assuming enough length that roots to tips brushing made sense. With short hair, that entire system collapsed, replaced by different maintenance approaches focused on shaping and styling rather than oil distribution. You finish your tea and prepare to leave the shop. Glancing once more at the young woman with her fashionable bob, she's reading a book something Victorian propriety would have discouraged in public, and appears utterly comfortable with her modern appearance. She'll spend tonight doing whatever she wants with the time you'll spend completing your 100 brush strokes. She's chosen freedom from a ritual you've never questioned seriously enough to abandon. Walking home. You wonder what Victorian women would have done if short hair had been socially acceptable in their era. How many would have immediately cut their hair, relieved to abandon the tedious maintenance ritual? How many would have kept long hair because they genuinely preferred it? Not from social coercion. These questions can't be answered definitively because Victorian women never had the choice. They performed their 100 strokes because society demanded it, because beauty culture insisted on it, because economic survival often depended on maintaining acceptable feminine appearance. Tonight, you'll brush your hair as you have for 4 decades. Tomorrow night, you'll do the same. You're too old now, too set in your ways, too attached to your identity as a woman with properly maintained long hair to embrace radical change. But you watch the young women with their bobs, and part of you, the part that remembers childhood tedium, the part that calculates hours wasted over decades, the part that occasionally resented the tyranny of beauty, maintenance secretly envies their rebellion against a ritual that you obeyed without ever truly consenting. You're a British colonial officer's wife living in Bombay in 1885, and you're sitting in uncomfortable silence across from Lakshmi, the young Indian woman your husband hired as an ayah for your children. She's been carefully braiding her thick, dark hair in the traditional style she's worn since childhood, elaborate plaits woven with flowers and ornamental pins that her mother taught her to create. You notice she never brushes her hair the way you do, never performs the 100 strokes you consider essential to proper feminine maintenance. Instead, she oils her hair heavily with coconut and jasmine preparations, works the oil through with her fingers, and arranges those complex braids that seem to require no brushing whatsoever. Yesterday, you suggested gently you thought that she might benefit from adopting English hair care practices, perhaps purchasing a proper hairbrush and learning to use it correctly. The look she gave you was polite but utterly uncomprehending, as if you'd suggested she start wearing shoes on her hands. 2 completely different hair care traditions are colliding in this colonial household, and you're beginning to realise that your Victorian 100-stroke ritual isn't universal truth but cultural practice, one among many ways humans have approached hair maintenance across the globe. The British Empire's expansion brought Victorian beauty practices into contact with radically different hair care traditions across Asia, Africa, and beyond. Victorian colonisers generally assumed their methods were superior, more hygienic, more civilised, more scientifically advanced, and often attempted to impose British practices on colonised populations. But hair is biologically diverse, and techniques effective for straight or wavy European hair often proved useless or actively damaging for the coiled, kinky, or tightly curled hair common among African and African-descended populations. The 100-stroke brushing ritual was designed specifically for hair types common among people of European ancestry. The technique of running a brush from scalp to tips, distributing natural oils along the hair shaft, works reasonably well for straight to wavy hair, but for tightly coiled hair, this approach is disaster. Brushing from roots to tips through coily hair causes breakage, damages curl patterns, creates painful tangles, and removes moisture rather than distributing it beneficially. African hair care traditions developed completely different approaches: protective styling, heavy moisturizing, careful manipulation based on the specific needs of their hair types. You remember arriving in India 3 years ago with absolute certainty about proper hair maintenance. You'd brought your finest boar bristle brush, your collection of English hair preparations, and full intention of maintaining Victorian standards despite the climate and cultural differences. The humid heat immediately challenged your assumptions. Your carefully maintained hair went limp and frizzy. Your usual products felt heavy and uncomfortable, and you found yourself envying Indian women's strategies for managing hair in tropical conditions. Colonial schools for indigenous girls often attempted to impose Victorian grooming standards, including hair brushing requirements. Missionary schools in particular viewed European beauty practices as markers of civilization and Christianity. Students were sometimes required to adopt English hairstyles, purchase brushes, and learn the 100-stroke ritual as part of their improvement and education. These policies showed profound ignorance of biological diversity and cultural difference, often causing genuine harm to girls whose hair couldn't tolerate Victorian techniques. Lakshmi has tried to explain her hair care approach to you, though language barriers complicate the conversation. Through gestures and broken English, she's communicated that her people have maintained healthy hair for millennia, using methods passed through generations: heavy oils, careful finger combing, protective braiding, regular washing with herbal preparations. She doesn't understand why you'd want to brush dry hair repeatedly, which seems to her a pointlessly damaging practice. Her incomprehension mirrors your own confusion at her methods, creating mutual cultural bewilderment. African women enslaved in the Americas and Caribbean faced particular brutality regarding hair care. Enslaved people were often denied access to traditional hair care tools and preparations, forced to manage their hair with inadequate resources in climates and conditions that made maintenance extremely difficult. Yet African hair care knowledge persisted through oral tradition and adapted practice, demonstrating remarkable cultural resilience. Victorian-era white observers, profoundly ignorant about African hair, often criticised black women's appearance while simultaneously preventing them from accessing appropriate care. Some Victorian travellers and anthropologists documented indigenous hair care practices with genuine curiosity rather than dismissive superiority. These accounts, while often still coloured by racist assumptions, at least acknowledge that different populations had developed sophisticated hair care traditions suited to their specific needs. An 1872 travel memoir by a British woman in West Africa described with fascination the elaborate hair braiding techniques she observed, noting that the results were quite beautiful in their own way, though entirely different from English styles. You've begun secretly adopting some of Lakshmi's techniques for managing your own hair in India's climate. You use lighter oils than you would in England, inspired by watching how effectively coconut oil works in humid conditions. You've learned that excessive brushing in this heat makes your hair worse rather than better, and you've quietly reduced your nightly strokes to perhaps 60 or 70. Though you'd never admit this to other English women in the colony who maintain rigid adherence to home country practices as a matter of cultural pride and colonial superiority. Historians still argue about the extent to which Victorian colonial beauty standards damaged Indigenous peoples' relationship with their own appearance. Certainly, imposing inappropriate hair care techniques caused physical damage, broken hair, damaged scalps, lost cultural knowledge. But the psychological impact was perhaps more profound, teaching colonized people that their natural hair was inferior, uncivilized, or ugly, that European standards represented objective beauty rather than cultural preference. These messages persist today in colorism, texturism, and the global dominance of Eurocentric beauty standards. Some Indigenous people resisted Victorian beauty impositions, maintaining traditional practices despite colonial pressure. Others adopted hybrid approaches, combining elements of European and Indigenous techniques to navigate colonial realities. Still others fully embraced Victorian standards, sometimes internalizing colonial messages about European superiority, sometimes making pragmatic decisions about survival and advancement in colonial systems. The responses varied enormously based on individual circumstances, personality, and the specific nature of colonial control in different regions. The exchange wasn't entirely one-directional. Some Victorian women genuinely learned from Indigenous hair care practices, recognizing that local populations had developed effective techniques for their environments. A few forward-thinking beauty writers incorporated exotic ingredients like coconut oil, argan oil, or shea butter into Victorian hair care recommendations, though usually without crediting the cultures that had used these materials for centuries. You watch Lakshmi complete her elaborate braiding. The final result elegant and practical, her hair will stay neat and protected throughout the day's work, requiring no further attention until tonight when she'll undo the braids, oil her scalp, and create a nighttime protective style. Her routine takes perhaps 20 minutes daily compared to your 45 minutes. Her hair looks healthy, glossy, and beautiful according to her culture's aesthetic standards, which differ significantly from Victorian ideals but are no less valid. That evening, you complete your own hair ritual, fewer strokes than prescribed, but still following the basic pattern you learned in childhood. Your brush glides through your straight brown hair, distributing oils just as Victorian beauty manuals promised it would. The technique works for your hair type. In this sense, the Victorians weren't entirely wrong, but you're newly aware that works for your hair type is very different from universally correct method that all humans should adopt. The colonial encounter around hair care reveals how Victorian certainty about their practices rested on profound ignorance about human diversity. The 100-stroke ritual wasn't scientifically optimal for all hair. It was culturally specific to European populations, then imposed globally through colonial power as if it were universal truth. Indigenous populations possess sophisticated hair care knowledge developed over millennia, perfectly adapted to their hair types and environments. Victorian colonizers dismissed this knowledge as primitive ignorance, replacing effective techniques with inappropriate European methods that often caused harm. Today, as you drift towards sleep in your Bombay bedroom, you hear Lakshmi moving quietly through the household, completing her evening duties. Her hair is neatly braided for sleep in a protective style that will preserve her daytime work and prevent tangling. Your hair lies loose across your pillow, brushed to Victorian standards, but increasingly managed according to lessons you've learned from living in a climate your childhood training never anticipated. Two traditions coexist uneasily in this colonial household, neither fully understanding the other, both convinced of their own correctness. But you're beginning to suspect that the confident certainty you brought from England deserves more questioning than you've previously allowed. Hair care, like so much else, might be more culturally relative and less universally true than Victorian culture insisted. You're scrolling through your phone in 2024 watching a beauty influencer's TikTok video that's already garnered 3 million views in just 2 days. She's sitting before her ring light, hairbrush in hand, explaining with absolute conviction why you should be brushing your hair 100 times every night. This ancient beauty secret has been forgotten by modern women, she declares, running a paddle brush through her highlighted blonde hair. Our great-grandmothers knew that 100 brushstrokes distribute natural oils, stimulate blood flow to your scalp, and promote healthy growth. I've been doing this for 3 months and my hair has literally never looked better. The comments section overflows with enthusiasm, thousands of women pledging to start the ritual tonight, thanking her for sharing this forgotten wisdom, declaring that modern society has lost touch with effective traditional practices. You feel a strange sensation watching this, something between amusement and horror, because you've spent the last hour researching Victorian beauty culture for a history project. This influencer has somehow resurrected a dubious 19th century practice, stripped it of its original context about feminine submission and marriage market economics, repackaged it as empowering self-care, and convinced millions of modern women to adopt a ritual their great-great-grandmothers might have secretly resented. The 100-stroke method has returned, zombie-like, from history's grave. The resurrection of Victorian beauty practices in 21st century wellness and beauty culture is fascinating and deeply ironic. Modern influencers promote these rituals as natural, traditional, and healthier than contemporary approaches, rarely understanding the original context or questioning whether historical practices were actually effective. The 100-stroke hairbrushing method appears regularly on social media, in wellness blogs, and in natural beauty communities, presented as ancient wisdom that modern science has supposedly validated through actual dermatologists and trichologists express far more skepticism. What makes this revival particularly interesting is how completely the practice's meaning has transformed. Victorian women brushed their hair 100 times nightly within a complex system of gender expectations, economic pressures, and limited alternatives. The ritual signalled discipline, femininity, marriage market preparation, and class status. Modern women who adopt the practice do so in entirely different contexts. They have access to running water, modern shampoos, effective hair care products, and generally aren't trying to attract husbands through glossy hair alone. They're performing a Victorian ritual while living in circumstances that would seem like science fiction to the women who originated the practice. You scroll through more videos, finding variations on the theme. One influencer insists you must use a boar bristle brush, specifically synthetic bristles don't work the same way, she warns, unknowingly echoing Victorian class distinctions between expensive natural bristles and cheap alternatives. Another recommends brushing in sections, counting 25 strokes per quadrant, ensuring complete coverage exactly as Victorian beauty manuals prescribed. A third combines the 100-stroke method with facial yoga and jade rolling, creating a hybrid routine that mashes together beauty practices from multiple eras and cultures with no apparent awareness of their origins. The comment sections reveal genuine belief in the practice's effectiveness. I've been doing this for 6 weeks, and my hair grows so much faster now, writes one user, claiming results that no amount of brushing could actually produce hair growth rates are determined by follicle activity beneath the scalp, not by surface manipulation. This is so relaxing, better than meditation, writes another, accidentally rediscovering what Victorian doctors claimed about rhythmic brushing treating nervous disorders. My grandmother did this and had beautiful hair her whole life, writes a third. not considering that her grandmother's hair health might have resulted from genetics, diet, or factors completely unrelated to brushing frequency. Modern dermatologists and hair care experts generally recommend brushing hair gently to remove tangles and distribute oils, but they don't endorse the 100-stroke method specifically. Some experts actively warn against excessive brushing, noting that too much manipulation can cause breakage, split ends, and damage to the hair cuticle. The Victorian assumption that more brushing automatically equals healthier hair doesn't align with contemporary scientific understanding of hair biology. Yet the practice persists, promoted by influencers with large platforms and minimal expertise. The natural beauty and wellness communities seem particularly drawn to Victorian-era practices, viewing them as more authentic and less toxic than modern commercial beauty culture. The irony is profound. Victorian beauty culture was intensely commercial, driven by manufacturers selling brushes, tonics, and various products through aggressive marketing that exploited women's insecurities. Patent medicine companies made fortunes from the very beauty anxieties that modern wellness culture claims to reject. The Victorian era wasn't some prelapsarian paradise of natural beauty wisdom. It was the beginning of industrial-scale beauty marketing that continues today. You find a YouTube video titled "I brushed my hair 100 times for 30 days, here's what happened." The creator documents her experiment with time-lapse footage and before and after photos. Her conclusion: her hair looks about the same, perhaps slightly shinier, possibly just because she's been paying more attention to it, but not dramatically transformed. The video has fewer views than the enthusiastic promotion videos, though ambiguous results don't generate the same engagement as miraculous transformation claims. Historians still argue whether this revival of Victorian practices represents harmless fun or something more troubling about how modern culture approaches the past. On one hand, if brushing your hair 100 times makes you feel good and doesn't cause harm, perhaps the historical accuracy of the practice's benefits doesn't matter. On the other hand, promoting pseudoscientific beauty claims, even historical ones, contributes to the broader landscape of misinformation that makes it difficult for people to distinguish effective practices from useless or harmful ones. The gender dynamics remain relevant too. The 100-stroke method is almost exclusively promoted to and adopted by women, continuing the Victorian pattern of imposing time-consuming beauty rituals specifically on female bodies. Men aren't being told to brush their hair 100 times nightly. The practice remains gendered, though modern promoters frame it as empowering choice rather than social obligation. The reframing doesn't entirely eliminate the underlying pattern. Women's time and attention are still being directed toward appearance maintenance in ways that men's generally aren't. Some critics of the revival note that privileged women with leisure time are most likely to adopt these elaborate routines. A working mother with 3 jobs doesn't have 45 minutes nightly for 100-stroke hairbrushing, just as working-class Victorian women often couldn't maintain the ritual consistently. The practice's modern revival, like its Victorian origins, correlates with class privilege having enough time, resources, and mental space to invest in elaborate personal care routines that offer questionable benefits. You watch one more video, this one from a content creator who actually researched the Victorian origins of the practice. She explains the historical context, the infrequent bathing, the marriage market pressures, the class signalling through brush quality, the servant labour that enabled wealthy women's adherence to the ritual. Her comments section is notably different. Many viewers express surprise and discomfort upon learning what the practice originally meant, with several declaring they'll discontinue their newly adopted routine now that they understand its problematic origins. But plenty of other videos continue promoting the 100-stroke method with no historical context whatsoever. Just enthusiastic claims about oil distribution and growth stimulation. The practice will likely continue cycling through social media trends, appearing every few years as influencers rediscover it, promoted to new audiences who've never heard of it, generating waves of adoption followed by quiet abandonment when the promised miraculous results don't materialize. The most fascinating aspect of this revival is how it reveals modern culture's complicated relationship with the past. We simultaneously romanticize historical practices as more natural and authentic, while living in circumstances utterly unlike those of our ancestors. We adopt Victorian beauty rituals without Victorian beauty standards, economics, or social structures. We're performing historical cosplay while calling it wellness, cherry-picking practices that seem appealing while ignoring the context that made them meaningful or oppressive to the people who actually lived them. You set down your phone, oddly exhausted by this journey from Victorian England to modern TikTok. The 100-stroke hair-brushing ritual has survived over a century and a half, transforming from obligation to choice, from class marker to wellness trend, from marriage market strategy to self-care practice. It's been promoted by doctors, beauty manual authors, mothers training daughters, and now influencers seeking engagement metrics. Its meaning has changed completely while the physical practice remains identical, a brush moving through hair, counting to 100, hoping for some benefit that may or may not materialize. Tonight, you'll probably brush your hair before bed, maybe 50 strokes, maybe fewer, just enough to remove tangles and feel like you've maintained basic grooming standards. You won't count obsessively or believe you're preventing nervous disorders or preparing yourself for marriage market success. But somewhere, thousands of women are carefully completing their 100 strokes, participating unknowingly in a Victorian ritual that's been resurrected without its original meaning, continuing a practice that connects them across centuries to women who brushed and counted and hoped that all these strokes might somehow secure them a better future, even as some secretly dreamed of the day they might finally be free to put down the brush forever. Now the 100-stroke ritual has been uploaded to the cloud, immortalized in millions of TikTok videos, ready to be rediscovered by future generations who will likely be equally puzzled by and attracted to this strange practice that refuses to die, despite questionable benefits and changing contexts. Some rituals, it seems, are simply too persistent to kill, too embedded in cultural imagination to fully abandon, even when their original meaning has been lost and their purpose has dissolved into historical curiosity and influencer content. The Victorians may be long dead, but their beauty anxieties and hair care obsessions live on, resurrected endlessly in new forms for new audiences who believe they're discovering something ancient and authentic rather than participating in the latest iteration of a very old pattern of gendered beauty pressure that simply changes its packaging with each generation. The moon rises higher outside your window, casting silver light across your bedroom. The day's activities fade into memory, the videos watched, the history considered, the strange connections between past and present explored. Your own hairbrush sits on the dresser, an ordinary object that carries such unexpected historical weight, connecting you to millions of women across time who held similar brushes and counted similar strokes and wondered, as you're wondering now, what all of this effort was truly for, and whether the promised benefits would ever actually arrive. The house settles into nighttime quiet, the familiar creaks and sighs of a building preparing for rest. Outside, the world continues its relentless modern pace, notifications pinging, videos uploading, influencers filming their nightly routines for tomorrow's content. But here, in this quiet space between past and present, you can almost hear the echo of all those Victorian women brushing and counting, performing their nightly ritual in candlelit bedrooms across the centuries, connected to you through the simple act of pulling a brush through hair and believing, as humans always do, that the right ritual performed with sufficient dedication might somehow transform us into the people we hope to become. Sleep approaches like a gentle tide, thoughts drifting and fragmenting, the day's discoveries settling into the deep places where memories rest and meaning forms slowly over time. The 100-stroke ritual continues in bedrooms around the world tonight, as it has for over a century, a curious survivor from an vanished era, meaningless and meaningful simultaneously, a practice that persists simply because some traditions refuse to die even when we've forgotten why we ever started them in the first place. And perhaps that's fitting. Sometimes rituals matter, not because they work, but because they connect us across time and space to other humans who also struggled with appearance, belonging, discipline, and the eternal question of how much of ourselves we should sacrifice to meet expectations we never quite agreed to, but somehow can't quite escape. Sweet dreams, dear listener. May your rest be peaceful and your hair, whether brushed 100 times or not at all, be exactly as it should be, which is to say, perfectly suited to you, regardless of what Victorian beauty manuals, modern influencers, or anyone else might claim about the right way to maintain your crowning glory. The brushes can rest now. The counting can cease. The night belongs to sleep, not to beauty rituals. And in this moment of quiet darkness, we can finally be free from all those voices telling us how we should look and what we should do and how many strokes it takes to become acceptable. Close your eyes now. Let it all go. Tomorrow is soon enough to decide what rituals, if any, deserve your precious time. For now, simply rest.